So welcome everyone today. We're going to have 4 presentations, and we're going to start with David Wupper. Did I say that properly?
Yeah.
Close enough?
Ish.
Ish. Okay, and so David is from the Land Economics Group at the University of Bonn, and before that he was a professor of quantitative agricultural economics at Humboldt University, and a postdoc in Ag Econ and Policy at Zurich. He did his PhD at Kiel. So David is going to talk to us about agricultural productivity and forest conservation in the tropics, systematic evidence from satellite data. He's going to take about 20 minutes to present, and I will give you a signal at 18 minutes. So you know it's time to wind up. And then we will take about 5 to 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. So with that, thank you very much. And David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So the slides are not up here?
They should show up on all the monitors. We spent all that time flipping around, but we don't have any...
It's up, it's all, I see them.
How do we get this? Yeah.
I think I forgot the...
Thanks.
Yep, you were right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that helps. Not coming.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Good. So I will talk about the relationship between crop yield changes and forest cover, and it's the focus on the local level. So I think at the global level we can expect equilibrium effects that increasing crop yields helps to spare forests, but I think at the local level we are fundamentally not fully understanding the big picture yet. There's a joint work with a couple of co-authors from Bonn and also from the World Bank. So it's Hardy and Alessandro Wycliffe, and then Sumya here from the World Bank. And we also received a little bit of funding from the World Bank to do this. And the big motivation for this is that right now in the tropics, like lower and middle income countries, we see in parts just slowdown of productivity, but also in parts declines in productivity in recent years. So productivity really seems to be a big challenge. And of course, also when you think about lower income countries, simply crop yields, like with all these major crop yield gaps, it's an important policy goal to raise yield, to raise productivity, to raise profitability. But then the worry is, could that backfire and come at the expense of forests? And if you look on the other side, in the tropics, we have this major issue that forest land is declining rapidly and cropland is expanding. So we don't see what we want, that the productivity is happening on the existing land, but we see the production expansion is to a large degree just coming from expanding the area into natural forests that are extremely valuable, of course, as we all know. So the question here is, we are sometimes expecting that raising productivity, raising yields helps to spare the forest, but the worry here is, could it also be the other way around, that we are actually fueling this problem even more? So that's the first question. The first question is simply what's happening when crop yields change. The empirical literature is quite unhelpful, not because it's not good, the literature is great, it's just that we find all these contradictory results, that sometimes we find that crop yield increase helps to spare the forest, another case study from a slightly different location or slightly different kind of yield change leads to the exact opposite effect. So we find all these causally, rigorously well done studies, and they show all kinds of effects. So it's pretty difficult from the existing literature to predict what will happen in a certain location when crop yields increase. So that's the first question. And the second question is also fitting to the World Bank. What's the role of policy? Because, of course, we want to know, are policies helping here in any way, or are they completely ineffective given the trends that we have seen? We use a lot of data. So this is all remote sensing data from satellites. We start with over 12 trillion images of satellite data. So when I heard that number, I was very impressed with us. But now it's possible. Like now we can use all of this. The trillions of observations are for the yield proxy estimation. Our main data is 30-meter resolution, but then later for the analyses, we aggregate that up to 10 kilometers so we can see the spillover from the cropland to the nearby forest. So all our data looks at these frontier regions where there is some cropland and some forest, and then what happens to the forest if things change on the cropland. We use Landsat data, if you're familiar with satellite data, for enhanced vegetation index. We take the annual maximum of that as our proxy for the yield. We then have this classification of what's cropland and what's forest. There are 10 different classes of forest, but we just treat all forests the same. We just say, is it forest or not? And then, yeah, we have these grid cells, and here you see our data. On top, that's the crop yield change, and then at the bottom, you see the forest change. The data is from 2001 to 2022, so it's a good panel. We look at proportions of forest cover, but then we also have alternative products like the Hansen forest loss or the tree cover loss. It's an incredibly often used product, and it's nice that we have one's forest cover and one's tree cover loss because they should correspond quite closely to each other, just in opposite directions, of course. Then the yield changes. We use the annual maximum, so we are really getting the main crop and not all the other stuff that also grows on a field or around a field, but we try to hit if you're growing corn, what's the highest corn yield or maize. And it has been shown that this is not a perfect measure, but it correlates quite well with crop yields. What we're not getting is multiple rotations in a year and all the other things. It's just the main crop and then the maximum harvest that you can achieve. Analytically, we are not focusing on specific shocks, or we try to be as general as possible, because what we see is that most yield changes are not coming from shocks. Most yield changes are gradual and long-term or fluctuations, but not these big shocks. That's just like one type of yield change. So for this, we don't have like this difference in differences with parallel trends and then something big changes. What we do here is like a dynamic panel model where we're simply saying we're controlling for past forest cover. We sometimes do 2 or 3 or 4 lags, but we control for the past level and the dynamics of forest cover, because of course both forest cover and crop yields are dynamic and also quite persistent over time. So this solves multiple problems at once. In some specifications, we include some additional controls for population and GDP. We always have fixed effects for the pixel, for the 10-kilometer pixel, and for the year. We sometimes include crop type fixed effects, but they don't seem to make a major impact in most specifications. And then error term. So let's get to the results. So the first main result is a sad one. It's crop yield improvements lead to forest loss. It's not a huge effect. The numbers are difficult to interpret. This is percentage points, but you have to remember that also in every single year for a given pixel, forest loss is not that common. Like most forest is standing still. So the forest loss rate is small compared to all the forests that exist. So the 0.15 percentage points, that's like 8% of forest loss in a pixel. So 8%, it's not super tiny, but it's also not amazingly large. When we do alternative estimates like Arellano Bond or those, the estimates grow a little bit. So Arellano Bond gives a little bit higher magnitude, but our main estimates are this 8% range. We find that yield change in the last 2 years or yield change in the last 4 years, so then that's for every unit of change. The yield change in the last 2 years is a little bit bigger than the yield change in the last 4 years on tree cover. But it's always significant, it's always negative. And the difference between the different specifications is simply control variables and fixed effects. And you can see they're barely making a difference. So crop type fixed effects, controlling for population, they're not really changing the results here. Then we were really interested in all these heterogeneous patterns. The top row is not so surprising, I think, if you're in the literature, and the more interesting part comes below. So as you would expect, the more initial tree cover you have, the higher the loss. If you're in a place without much forest left, you can't lose so much. But in these forest frontier regions, like Colombia, Brazil, like the Amazon, if you have a lot of initial forest, you can lose a lot. That's what we're finding. In terms of remoteness, this is not happening near the capital. Again, this happens at the frontier regions, like far away. Again, this is really the frontier region of the Congo, Indonesia, Brazil, and so on. We find an inverted U-shape for the potential agricultural area. So the places with the least potential agricultural area and the most, they don't have this effect. We have it in the middle. And I think that's a balance between incentive to expand cropland and ability. So in some places you want to expand, but you can't because there's not much land available. In some places you really want to expand, which was you want to, but you can't, and then you can, but you don't want to. So in the middle you have the sweet spot where you find the biggest effect. What I find very interesting, but remember, this is not causal. This is describing where are the effects bigger and where are they smaller. We are right now working on getting the causality better. But what we find, places with more agroforestry don't have the effect. So we find the expansion into forest following crop yield increases in places with low agroforestry adoption. And this is what many people have expected, and we do see this pattern here. But we have to make this more causal than it is right now. Right now, we only see that the effect is not there where there's a lot of agroforestry. Regional farm size, we find the effect driven by larger farms. Regions with larger farms have this. Our interpretation of this is that it is probably connected to constraints of who can expand. If you're highly labor constrained, you don't have much to invest, maybe it's difficult for you to expand further. But if you're a large farm with mechanization and the ability to invest, maybe that's the kind of farms that can take this opportunity and expand the land. We also looked at this by region, and it's also true within the continent. So also within Africa, the larger farms, they don't have the largest category anymore, but in general, also in Africa, it's the larger farms that drive this. And then by region, this is, it's not surprising that Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa are the places where this is mostly happening. What surprised me at first was that Sub-Saharan Africa has a larger effect than Latin America, especially given the farm size. But we find that it's, again, in Sub-Saharan Africa, slightly larger farms, slightly more mechanized, those farms are the ones that respond the most. And then we do this simple exploratory analysis that we already have now, I think, made more causal, but this is just the descriptive part. We find that places with more forest conservation policy, for every level of threat, just captured by how much initial forest cover there is, for every level of initial forest cover, the places with more forest conservation policies in place have a way smaller effect of crop yield increases than the places with fewer public policies. So this is, just from how striking this is, quite suggestive that forest conservation policies play an important role. And what I have just added yesterday is a shift share IV, where I'm using as the share the initial policies, and then as the shift the tropic-wide leave one out trend in policies. And there I find a very clear pattern that the places with more policies don't have this effect, and it's really the places without these policies. I want to do the same for the agroforestry as well to also see that. And then finally, we did one more heterogeneity analysis. We have many more in the paper, but this is one that I found very striking. Because the literature shows all these positive and negative effects, and we are so consistently always finding negative effects, I was wondering, is there anything we can do to also sometimes get a positive effect? Like, how is it possible that we are never finding positive effects? And what we see here is short-term changes have the opposite effect of what we are looking here in the paper. So what we're finding is a 3-year improvement leads to the highest forest cover loss. A 2-year improvement leads to a slightly smaller forest loss. A yield improvement in the same year leads to a response of forest gain, and vice versa for the decline. So a 3-year decline leads to forest gain or a reduction in loss. 2-year decline is insignificant. A 1-year decline, so this would be your drought shock, your negative weather, like those things, that leads to a forest cover loss. So to discuss this, so the overall tropic-wide effect is yield improvements lead to 8% more forest loss. This is a local partial equilibrium effect. This is not the global response taken into account, but this is just what happens in the same 10-kilometer grid cell. The initial forest cover is a very strong predictor of whether this yield, forest cover loss is going to happen. It's driven by larger farms. What I have not shown here is also just correlated with this mechanized farms. So I think it's just less labor constrained and more able to invest farms. And then the 2 policy levers that we're identifying are public forest conservation policies. So if you're helping farmers to become more productive and raise the yields, you should make sure that there are also policies in place that then restrict the expansion incentive and just make sure that the forest is protected. Could be a regulation. Of course, you can also do a payment scheme, but these kinds of policy responses to take care of the negative side effect seem to work, and they also just make like logically sense that they should be in place. And then the agroforestry adoption. And then to wrap up, so limitations. We have a lot of limitations. The first limitation is that we're focusing on crop yields alone. We are not focusing on productivity. We are not focusing on profitability. We're not focusing on expectations. All these things that we know drive farmer behavior in the tropics, we are, in this sense, very narrowly only looking at crop yield. We only assign like a single dominant crop per cell. And it's not even a very high resolution error-free measure, but it's a very coarse measure of what we think there is a crop, and there's obviously measurement error in this. This is even another big issue here. Very often satellite data is even confusing tree crops with forest. If I look here, I wanted so much to do this crop by crop and see what happens if soy yield increases and oil palm increases, and it's horrible because sometimes we find like these strange patterns that it's clear that oil palm is just confused for a forest. So we think, oh great, so oil palm doesn't cause any forest loss. It's obviously not the case, but it's just that the products are not yet reliable enough with these distinctions. Then from an ecological point of view, we are also not considering ecological value. So obviously there are forests that are great for biodiversity, super valuable, and then there are forests where nobody cares about whether that forest exists or not. We treat every forest the same. And then the causal identification part, that's what I mentioned. We are right now strengthening this part. But so far the focus was about providing the big picture, understanding the general pattern, and like the main focus was we don't want to focus on one particular channel and one particular kind of crop yield increase. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Very much, David. You bought us a little time. So let's open it up for questions. Please announce your affiliation, your name, and let's take maybe 3 questions at a time.
Thank you very
Go
much.
ahead, please.
I'm Kei Otsuka. Already, David mentioned that the profitability variable is missing, but at least the deforestation depends, I think, on productivity and also prices. At least prices should be included. And in terms of cost, what is important is the labor cost, employment opportunities and wage rates. Those things should appear in the union regulation. That was my impression. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just take a couple questions.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I think we had one question over here. Okay, so the 3 of you, in order. Use your mic.
I'm Tanda Gomez, assistant professor from University of Manitoba in Canada. It's a great paper, and then we're doing some similar topics. So I want to see how do you respond to these questions. So one of the questions we are considering is that the forest measurement. So we have one of the courses talking about the secondary forest in Pinas. So we were worried about that, whether this deforestation is mostly concentrated at the primary forest versus the secondary forest. And I think there's some data set keep track of that. So there's not the global forest watch. The other one, they updated later. So probably you can use that as a double check. And the other thing I was thinking is the yield. And so in time series, you always have this spurious regression. So now you only have the level of the yield. Can you also try to include the lag of the yield? So condition on the lag of yield, that would be the changes of the yield in annual sense. So I think it corresponds to one of your different tests there. So if you can show some robustness in that respect, I think it will be cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Over to the 3rd question.
Hi, I'm Jake Ricker-Gilbert from Purdue. Thanks for the nice presentation. I guess I had one technical question too, you kind of hit it, but yeah, you mentioned you tried the Ariana bond specification. I was thinking with the dynamics going on in that panel, that's probably would be your preferred specification, estimated in first difference, and then have the 2 lag, of the potentially endogenous variable, the forest cover. But it doesn't seem like that's your main specification. But anyway, the other question was, can you look at yields, since you have this kind of long panel, yields in the number of years since the deforestation happened? I'm wondering if there's some kind of slash and burn going on, yields stay high for a while and then they decline because the soil gets degraded and then they move on. Can you see anything like that in terms of the dynamics of what's happening with yields and when it's been when the forest has been cut? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So some good questions for you, David. Did you include the right variables? Where is deforestation concentrated? And do you have the right specifications? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Great questions. And I would like to talk with all of you afterwards and to discuss these a little bit more. Like the first one with the prices. So the issue is that at this granularity level, we don't have good productivity or price or any of this data that we cannot infer from satellites. The only reason why we can do this is because it's measured with satellites. So the question which I would like to discuss maybe a little bit later would be, does it make sense to multiply our highly granular data with something that comes from a more aggregated, wherever it's available, price level and so on? Yeah, or what to do exactly, where to include prices and these other variables. Because this was also our open thinking. Should we do this, or should we completely stay away from it and just say we focus on yield? So would be happy to talk about that more. The primary and secondary forest. So we explored products that distinguish between managed and natural forests, and like these things. We got very weird results doing that. We found completely patterns that go against anything we know from the literature. Huge forest gains in Latin America, or like jumps between periods where we gave up on that idea and just said we focus on forest because we didn't trust this. But it would be obviously helpful if we could get this right and understand this better. The question, what should be the main specification, what's the robustness check? Is this our main and the Arellano bond is the robustness, or other way around? I would also be very open for discussion who thinks which one should be the main. I don't have a strong opinion on this. I had a slight preference for this order, but happy to be convinced otherwise. What else was there?
Oh, about time since the
Time, yes. We find a ton of interesting dynamics in our data. It's really like looking at, we have a lot of specific supplementary materials, like something happened and then how does it pan out over time? There's so much rich stuff going on here. So we probably should make that more of a story because there is so much going on. Maybe we can even distinguish with the slash and burn just based on the farm sizes and a little bit guessing where this is maybe more, and then we can even distinguish. But it's clearly very, very dynamic.
Great, thanks. We have a question over here. 2 questions.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a heavy critic here, but it's going to be really hard to explain deforestation. At least I'm Brazilian, coming from the Brazilian country and studying land use occupation. It's going to be really hard to explain deforestation based on yields for a Brazilian context, and we're one of the heaviest deforestators over there. There's much relation on occupying public land and then speculation on it. So I saw on those maps there was an increase in yield in the southeast region, which is producing sugarcane, which is a very technical and highly technological type of production. And what we see in the Amazon is a completely different scenario. And I'm assuming, for example, another Latin American example, in Bolivia, you have land regularization programs nationwide, and to prove that they're occupying land, you have to deforest to show that you are socially occupying the land. So there are many cultural explanations for the deforestation rather than yield itself.
Yeah.
So, and I'm assuming other countries like Congo or the Southeast Asia, there are other drivers for deforestation rather than yields. So I'm just wondering, how can we try to find a global explanation for such dynamic and different contexts in tropical forests worldwide, and how you can try to add that to your, let's say, technical explanation?
Thank you. And actually, that's a great segue into the question that might be coming from Carolina. No.
No, only one clarification. Did you include livestock or not?
No.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And do we have anyone else who wants to come in with a question? Okay, well, I'm going to ask a question then. And so I believe there's been a number of papers produced by the bank that have talked about how investment in productivity has slowed, in fact, and growth in productivity has slowed over the last decade. So what do you have to say about that and its implications for the areas of forests?
Yeah. Should I answer those 2 questions now?
Yeah.
If that's okay. So starting with the Brazil question, yes, I agree that what we are finding here is not much driven by Brazil for multiple reasons. Brazil increases production by adding one more crop to the rotation. It's not so much that corn is improving, it's just that soy could be added and these things and GMOs and then you have all this forest to pasture conversion, and the pasture is converted to the soy, and it's not directly the forest to the soy. So all of these things mean that our results, and you also see that, we find a lot of effect in Latin America, but it's even more elsewhere, exactly because we miss most of the story from Brazil and Latin America more generally. So this is more a story about Africa than Latin America. And I don't think we can do much about this. The paper is already quite big, so now making it fit to every region in the tropic individually and saying in Asia it should be like this, and I think that will just be too much. Yeah, so that's a little bit. We have been thinking about this a lot because, yeah, we know the drivers in Latin America are different. And then the question about what's the implication of having less R&D and less of all this productivity spending. What do we think did this to the forests? I think in general, probably the best policy overall would be to have very high R&D spending and combine these extension service and credit and all these investment and combine that with sound environmental policy. And also the extension and the R&D can already be steered. If it's a public investment, it can already be steered in the right direction. It can already include agroforestry, and already the extension service can help sustainable intensification, because also you have to remember all this forest loss will also feed back negatively on agriculture again. Maybe in the short term it's a good idea to get rid of all your forests, maybe not, but definitely in the medium term it's a very bad thing. Like if you're in a place that's already maybe a little bit too dry and you get rid of your natural vegetation, or you're placed with pests. I mean, tropics are full of all these crop pests. If you're then also getting rid of all the biodiversity around this, I think it's a horrible idea. So have the right investments that directly get targeted at both these things, sustainable productivity and environmental protection, is probably very easy investment case to be made here.
All right, thank you very much, David. Let's give him a round of applause. The room is filling up. Now we're going to go to Carolina Castro Osorio from the Universidad de los Andes. And she is an economist with a very multidisciplinary background. And her research subjects are community-based conservation, land tenure, deforestation, and adaptation to climate change. So she's going to give us a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then we're going to go into another series of questions. And welcome, Klaus.
Okay, thank you. Today I am going to speak about these RED Plus projects, reducing emission from deforestation and degradation, and how it works to reduce deforestation and illicit coca crops. And this is a very narrow evidence from Afro-Colombian collective titles. So let me, sorry, what happened? Here.
I'm not sure what happened. I'm going to try again.
Where can I put the...
Here.
Ah, yeah. So let me start saying that in Colombia, 50% of the natural forests are under collective titles, mainly from indigenous and from Afro-descendants communities. And 34% of all the country is under collective titles. And this is more or less the same size of Germany, for example, if you take into account in terms of hectares. The other thing that I want to highlight is that in all the Pacific coast of Colombia, we have more than 100 community councils that have collective titles since the late 90s. And we are going to see a map to arrive to our country, but please wait a minute. Yes, okay. So now you have here the map we are going to talk about this Pacific region in Colombia. We have here all the communities councils that we have in this region, and each color represents the year when each community council received the title of the land. And the other important element is that 1 hectare of forest stores approximately between 80 and 170 tons of CO2, but this is during all the life of the forest. So only in 1 year, 1 hectare of forest prevents about 5 tons of CO2. What this means, 1 hectare of avoided deforestation implies more or less between $25 to $50 in carbon credits for the communities if they sign a REDD+ project. So you can see that it is very low cost. In this graph, you can see the evolution of the annual value that we have in the carbon markets, and we can see an increase until 2021, 2022, where we start to have a global public discussion about the credibility of carbon offsets. And after this discussion, we can see a decline in 2023. The other thing that I want to highlight is that, for example, in 2018, Colombia had participated in this market with the 48% of all the carbon credits traded in the market. And Colombia is the 3rd place after Indonesia and Brazil selling carbon credits. So, which is our question? Our question is that does the signing of REDD+ projects in community councils reduce coca, illicit crops, and deforestation? How we answer this question, we implement a difference in difference analysis with staggered treatment, allowing the evaluation of the impact of 17 REDD+ projects in 33 community councils. And I want to highlight the main contribution of this paper. So the first one is that we gave evidence of the impact of collective REDD+ projects, because we have some evidence and very mixed evidence from general REDD+ projects. We have here the first one about collective REDD+ projects. This is also novel in analyzing outcomes others than deforestation, and it provides causal evidence for the debate on REDD+ additionality, and also it demonstrates the potential of linking environmental policy with drug policy or with other illicit activities. And the main important limitation of this study is that we cannot test for spillovers. Okay, our main identification assumptions are that we cannot see anticipation effects. As we are going to see in the event studies, we can say that we have pre-treatment trends and they are parallel, so these show us the plausibility of the parallel trends after the treatment. And I want to highlight 4 potential sources of bias. First, selection into singers versus no singers could be a bias. Because of that, we use the not yet treated community councils as controls. Third element will be timing appears partly shaped by intermediary intervention. So there is no evidence of a sharp behavioral change immediately before signing. And the last one is that we test for differential effects depending on pretreatment exposure to deforestation and the extension of coca crops. Which data we have for coca cultivation area, we have 1 square kilometers polygons. For deforested area, we have the 3 meters resolution, but we upgrade to 90 per 90, and we have this database from a local institution, but we also test our results with Hansen database. And we have the community councils polygons. So now in this map again, we have the communities councils that sign REDD+ project. The yellow communities are those that didn't sign a REDD+ project. In terms of the extension, it is more or less 48% of the land of the communities councils are now under a REDD+ project. So this is our results. On average, we have a decline in 33 square meters per pixel. So the effect size of this is 32% in deforestation, a reduction in deforestation. And for coca crops, we see a reduction in the extension of coca crops of 0.33 hectares per kilometer, per square kilometer, sorry, and the effect size is 90%. Which is the economic magnitude of this effect for deforestation? We have an annual avoided deforestation, or more or less of 9,000 of hectares, and this implies the 5% of national deforestation. And for coca crops, this reduction implies the 3% of national coca crops. And here you can see all the event studies and the effects annually. If we have time, that we are not going to have time, we can see all the robustness checks typical in this kind of methodological approach. And the other thing that I want to highlight is that we did some heterogeneity analysis, and we can see that in regions with higher levels of deforestation previous to the treatment, we can see a higher level of impact, and also in coca crops. And yes, if we have time, I will return to the size of community councils. So our second question was, okay, how this kind of payment for environmental services can, in a collective tenure setting, can offset the opportunity cost. So we have key challenges here. Collective payments may not offset the individual economic benefits of unsustainable activities. For example, in Colombia, 1 hectare of coca can generate $3,000 per year. And remember that I say that the payment for a carbon credit will be only between $25 and $50 per year. And the other thing is, in these collective settings, we have the free riding and collective action dilemmas, and we also have the problems about negotiation capacity and collective agreements. So we implement some qualitative work to understand the mechanisms behind these results, because they are difficult to understand from the theory or from the classical economic theory in a collective tenure setting. So we have three main mechanisms. The first one is the governance and social capital. So these projects reinforce the local governance structure and collective action. This gives the community the opportunity to update rules, and also to establish a routine of monitoring the forest. The leaders say that they have today greater territorial control, and the other thing is that these projects develop the possibility of create nested organizations around sustainable production cooperatives. And this is very important because this is in dialogue with the 8th principle of Ostrom. You can see here some of the monitoring patrols in the regions where they found deforestation in remote areas, and they can stop very early the evolution of deforestation in remote areas. The second category of mechanisms are individual and collective benefits. So collective payments was invested in public goods rather than split individually. So they invest these in schools, in, for example, one ambulance speedboat. Another specific individual incentive is that we have a shift from illicit to licit employment. Today, the loggers are today the forest monitors. So they have now a stable employment, and they can do all the patrols in the zone. For the Coca channel, we saw that these projects improve livelihood alternatives, so they can invest now in other productivity activities around cacao, coconut, plantain, and non-timber forest products, but they don't receive an individual payment for this. They receive this in cooperatives. And the tier one is very important because in this region, they receive a lot of cooperation projects. But they say today that these RED Plus projects that have 30 years of contract gave them some security about what they are going to receive in the future. That is very different to the cooperation projects, because the cooperation projects is around 2 or 3 years. And the final mechanism is this interaction between, we have here a dual accountability between local contract and also the global oversight. And this can change the behavior. They say that for them now is very clear that all the global can see them from the air, from the satellite images, and they are having this permanent observation and panoptic view. Okay, to conclude, probably in relationship with your conclusion, this is an opportunity for integrate policies. REDD+ can serve as a powerful tool, not only for forest conservation, but also for controlling illicit activities or unsustainable activities. We want to highlight the value of co-benefits. Carbon credits that come with co-benefits may attract a premium in international markets, and this is very important because for the communities, conservation is costly. Community governance also matters. REDD+ projects may strengthen governance and reactive social processes, but it depends a lot in the previous level of social capital. We have another paper that studied this setting in indigenous communities, and the results are highly different. And yes, these kind of projects can be additional in areas under high pressure of deforestation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Let's open it up for questions. We'll take 3 at a time. Please introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Flora He at Zhejiang University. So I have 2 kind of clarify questions. The first one is, I wonder if you've compared the like carbon benefits from your evaluation to the credits that are associated with these projects. And the second one is, in terms of your potential mechanism from the qualitative work, I think it's really cool that you're combining these mixed methods. I'm just curious if these mechanisms are tied to the REDD project itself, or are they just, for example, the civilian, like improved monitoring capacity?
Excuse me, for example, the what?
Are these like mechanisms that you're looking at, are they part of the REDD project, or are they implemented by some additional programs? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Marie-Louise. I work here at the World Bank at the Development Impact Group. And I have 2 questions. So the first one, I think it would be really interesting to think about other outcomes, and also particularly thinking about what happens to crime, especially because it seems to be driven by the coca industry, right? So I think that could, speak to broader social value of these programs beyond the environmental value, and how to think about quantifying that. And then I think the second question, I guess more of a comment, is I know there is data on coca suitability in Colombia, and so I think it could be interesting to incorporate that into the analysis, and also think about heterogeneity effects by more suitable versus less suitable. And yeah, I guess like other crops, what's happening to other crops other than coca as well. Thanks.
Thank
Great,
you.
thank you. Third? Any third? All right, we'll go with those 2 for now. Carolina, over to you.
So, Flora or Fiora? Flora. Flora, thank you. The first question, no. We didn't manage because we didn't have all the contract projects for all the community councils. So because of that, we cannot match the level of carbon credits with the level of deforestation. So this is more broadly, we know that we have this impact on the level of deforestation, but I don't know if it is lower from the objectives of the contract. The second one, the mechanisms. I need to say that in this, we have some previous papers of this region where the the land titles generates a decrease in deforestation. But this was in the late 90s. Since 2014 and 2016, when we have the peace agreement in Colombia, we can see in Colombia an increase of deforestation. And we saw that increase also in this region. So the mechanisms that we highlight here comes from previous social capital, but was reinforced. Without the REDD+ projects, probably we are going to see the steady increase in deforestation and also in coca crops. Because, for example, since that time, we can see an increase in more than 200% of the extension of coca crops. Thank you for the suggestion of other outcome on violence. Yes, the trouble here is how to measure that at the level that we have now our data. No, the level of our data is at the level of pixel, and also to have information at the level of the community council is very difficult, but we can try to search more. And about coca suitability, thank you. Okay, we control that through fixed effects, yes, but for an heterogeneity analysis could be perfect. We only have these previous pre-trends on coca, but we can use coca suitability. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I mean, it's really interesting that people are willing to trade off $3,000 a year per hectare for $50 a year per hectare. I mean, with a 30-year guarantee, it doesn't even come close, though, to what you would make growing coca. So, it's almost too good to be true in a way that, the certainty equivalent of income is worth so much to them. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit, where you showed us a kind of an average treatment effect on the treated, but was there a lot of heterogeneity in the results? I mean, are certain groups, certain areas more interested in this than others? What can you say, broadly about the external validity? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And we have two more questions.
Hi, I'm Felipe Jordan from PUC Chile. And I was wondering if there might be some displacement effects of actually people growing coca going right outside or to other regions. So I was wondering if you have looked at the treatment effect in the outer ring of the communities or some other ways you could measure those displacements.
Thank you. And a third question?
Hi, I'm Ritvik Ghosh from North Carolina State University. I thought this is a very interesting presentation. I have a question about kind of going upwards. Who's making the payments? It's through the REDD program, but does that matter? And are they valuing these co-benefits that you're mentioning? And if not, then is there going to be extra money, or does that matter to the future of the program?
Great, thank you. And if I could just take the liberty of asking a sort of similar question, which is, so you mentioned the importance of the co-benefits, but you didn't really quantify or measure them. And as our colleague from Purdue said, there's this huge divergence in the numbers. So if you could just talk to that a little more, it would be helpful to understand how you're getting to the conclusion you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. For this first and last question, I need to say that this is only a mean. The $3,000 per year per hectare from coca is a mean that we have in different places in the country. We have some regions in this Pacific region that there is no suitability for coca. So there is a comparison that is to force to think in that, but will not. They are not going to use all this area for coca. One thinking about that. The other thinking is that about heterogeneity. I don't know. Okay.
Do you want to go back to the slide?
No, don't worry. The thing that we prove is that previous community councils that have high levels of pre-coca previous to the treatment, we can see a higher decrease in coca extension, because probably it is more rentable now to be part of the RED Plus projects and to be part of the consensus of the community around these RED Plus projects. That is one thing that I want to say. The other one is about displacement. As I say, our main limitation is that we don't have the possibility to explore all the spillovers because, for example, the spillovers will be very near to the community councils or will be in the country or even in the country in Peru, for example. But for the very narrow frontier of the community councils, we test also if we can see an increase in deforestation and also in coca, and we cannot see because we test with an RD estimation, and we cannot see a displacement in the very short frontier. And about co-benefits, I think that we need to develop agreements around how to pay these kind of co-benefits, but we don't have. We have now premium values in carbon credits around biodiversity, but not around illicit activities. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting stuff. So we're going to move straight to the next presentation, and I'd like to welcome Jintao Chu. He's a natural resource economist with a PhD from Virginia Tech, and he works on forest sector reform in developing countries, especially China. And he's interested in land tenure, eco-compensation, forest carbon, and a range of other issues. Green gains from connectivity, a really provocative paper here. Please, the floor is yours, Jintao.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. This paper is collaborative work with many young colleagues, students, and I'm the least eligible person to explain the econometrics here, but I hope I can give you an interesting story. Yeah, basically, in the last 4 decades, China observed very significant forest area and volume expansion, probably rare among all the developing countries. And we see a lot of forest expansion. But in the meantime, along economic growth, we also see a lot of expansion of infrastructure, such as highway, airport, urban expansion. So people, to explain forest growth, I personally think it's mostly because of collective forest tenure reform. We decentralized collectively owned forest from collective management to individual management. But obviously, we experience a strong highway expansion. And a lot of people will, especially my young colleagues, will be interested in seeing whether these infrastructure, obviously they occupied a lot of lands, and whether this expansion of infrastructure negatively or positively affect forest growth. I personally think our forest system is resilient. The better connectivity, better market access probably will improve forest resource. But there's general concern. If we go to the other countries, such as Brazil, there's obviously negative association between road and forest management. So it would be an interesting problem to study. So I have all these contents. Yeah, basically, the motivation is, I've said, China leads global greening. We probably experience the largest forest area expansion due to huge effort in plantation in the world. But we also see a lot of highway expansion, especially after 2000. China entered WTO economic growth probably for about 10 years, around 20%. And we got a lot of extra money to spend, public money to spend on infrastructure. So we observe huge expansion after 2000. Highway, airport, a lot of new construction, real estate boom in China. So we would like to study the relationship between one development, the highway expansion, during the first decade of WTO entry, the impact on natural resources. So our forest area doubled from 1978 to like 2023. But also our highway network grew about fivefold just from 1995. So probably we have our first highway around 92. But after that, it's in 20 years, we see fivefold increase in highway. But obviously, in the same process, we see forest expansion. And basically, the motivation is like most road to forest evidence studies, frontier settings, see negative relations, especially in developing countries. But you just look at the phenomena in China, they are moving in the same direction. So this paper study the different scenario compared to other developing countries. So we don't really have natural forests that you guys talk about. We have natural forests from a region, and we have plantation forests, but they're all managed. We have very little unmanaged of old growth now. So, and our data basically only allow us study the plots that really remain intact. So it's better to use that data to study forest quality instead of area, because we use our national forest inventory data. And as I said, we have pretty different institutional setting. We have very strict land use control. I've traveled to Brazil, very surprised by so easy access to state-owned land. But in China, you'll be in jail in 2 hours if you do that, basically. So we have very strict land use control policy. That policy is getting stricter now. It used to be not this strict. So our colleague Jikun K all know that. Last 4 decades, we see China's land use control getting stronger. Now, if you put a little house in the land, people will know right away because it's satellite above. Then we have collective forest tenure reform. For 4 decades, we conducted 2 rounds of collective forest. We have 60% of China's forests is owned by village collective. But along with agricultural reform, China's collective forests were getting decentralized further down into individual household. But it's not that easy. It took two runs to finish that. But from my personal study, collective forest tenure reform did wonder to China's forest system. And we have this Western development after 2000. And basically a lot of huge amount of money poured into Western area. Because most of the highway used to be in East Coast. Now, along the time, they moved to the West. So from the map, you can see that China's highway network is getting richer and bigger. The questions, when forest area is relatively fixed, basically it's due to the constraint of our data. Does improve the connectivity, raise the quality of managed forest. By the way, forest qualities remain a big concern in China. Our area expand like a double. Quality, if you measure that as a volume per hectare, it doesn't change that much. We want to realize carbon neutrality based on forest carbon. That's remain a big challenge to China. We still have problem to solve. So the question of forest quality is important for China's carbon neutrality strategy. The preview of results is that based on the reduced form estimation, moving 10 kilometers closer to a new highway raises timber volume by about 2%. The effects are concentrated within 20 kilometer distance. Connected plots grow about, and we have a binary estimation basically indicating that within the 20 kilometer distance, if there's highway, then the plots we studied, the quality, the forest volume grow about 15% faster than more distant plots. The plots outside this 20 kilometer zone. And we also had a model estimating carbon implications. So from 2010 to 2010, those plots adding together, the forest carbon increased from around 200 to 500. So basically, they absorb like total carbon emission of Spain in 2000, but 2010, they can take all the Canadian emission away. And we did some mechanism analysis and heterogeneity analysis along the way. So our data is pretty difficult to get because this is confidential data, national inventory data. Because we work with the government a lot, so we get access to partial data of this National Forest Service. So we have like around 32 provinces, and this survey covers all of it, but we only get access to data to 11 more important forest provinces. And only between the 6th and the 8th wave. People used to use data from 6th to 9th wave. And before that, the criteria was different. After that, the criteria was different again. So between 6th and the 9th wave, the data are more comparable. And we have about 18,000 geolocated permanent plots, but each plot has the same area, so 1 mu. Each plot had 1 mu of area. So basically it's a 15th of a hectare. And we measure transport access using transportation network data set for highways and travel speed information, and also national fundamental geographic information data sets for non-highway roads. And to solicit mechanism, we use rural fixed observation point household survey. It had been managed by Chinese government for 40 years. County firm registration records, and some GIS information, and the China Forestry Statistical Yearbook. And for the quantitative model, we used several rounds of population census, and also used input-output interprovincial input-output tables to calibrate the industrial transaction. So this is our data. We don't have data for all China, so we only get access to 11 data for 11 provinces. But they are major. They basically major forestry provinces, and we measure forest quality based on. So this national inventory data is very thorough. When they do it every 5 years, for each plot, they measure every tree and measure the height, the diameter at breast height, and yeah, basically, so variable for each individual trees. So you have a pretty good idea, accurate measurement for the plot, basically. The plot area never changes. It's a fixed plot. It has problem, statistical problem, if you only use fixed plot, but it's also wonderful data. And so we only have 11 major forestry provinces that cover 15% of national forest land and 43% of standing timber volume. And we basically look at only the arbor forest plots in order to measure the forest volume change. So the outcome of interest basically is a decadal change in forest volume in each plot, and with other indicators to support it. And yeah, we did some inclusion because we want to measure market access effects. So basically, it's a variation, difference in difference model. First, we have a long difference baseline specification. Then we have a binary, it's more standard difference estimation. For the first one, so the left-hand side variable basically is a decadal change in forest quality outcomes for the plot in specific country in the specific province. And the main explanatory variable is, for the first one, is basically the distance to the nearest highway. And for the binary, basically is whether there's a highway within 20 kilometer distance, and the other socioeconomic control variable, and also fixed effect variables. So the highway placement is potentially endogenous because roads are sited in response to some economic and environmental conditions. Okay, so we use two IVs. First, we use the distance to the planned highway. So the engineer always have this transportation map. So basically, engineering feasibility. Usually, each city have a map that engineer think is the least cost route from any two point. So for the nation, they also have this potential highway network. We measure our plot to the distance of nearest highway in that map instead of the real map. The second IV is we have a 1962 road map, basically. So that basically is our historical foundation for current highway. And we use both of them to instrument distance to current highways. So basically, this is our first. This is a transportation map made by engineers, and this is the reality compared to the map. The left one is the real network, highway network, to the transportation map. The right one is the current real network to the 1962 road network. So this is the baseline. The highway proximity and the forest volume. We can see either OS as mentioned and IV as mentioned, both indicate for the continuous variable. So the close negative means the more distant than the less for forest volume. Basically, so distance, reduce distance to highway, increase forest volume. The second is basically within 20 kilometers distance zone, if there's highway, then the forest plot will be higher. So the takeaway is that based on continuous IV estimation, that moving 10 kilometers closer to a highway raises timber volume by about 2%. The binary estimate implied that plots within 20 kilometers of new highways experience about 15% faster volume growth relative to the average decadal growth rate of 37%. Okay, so based on the model, so I even didn't look at the model part, but basically that model tried to calculate the carbon gain. So the carbon gain, because of this highway expansion and the forest volume growth, amounted to like growing from 200 to 500 megaton CO2. And it's compared to annual emission from Spain to Canada. I think my time is over. I'll stop here. So we did have some heterogeneity looking at institutional setting, other socioeconomic factors.
Great, thank you very much. So a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's open it up for questions. Please say your name and affiliation.
I'm Kei Otsuka from Asian Development Bank Institute. I'm a long-time friend of Jintao, and I enjoyed your presentation. So when new expressway is built, cutting trees becomes profitable, and growing new trees becomes profitable. So there are positive and negative effects. In the case of China, lots of forests were already destroyed before expressway came. Therefore, growing trees becomes the issue. And then that is why you have negative effects of the distance from the highway. So that is the expected result for me. And then the most interesting thing about China is this collective tenure reform. Collective tenure reform introduces some element of individualization of tree rights. So that provides incentive for farmers to grow trees. And is that variable included in your regression?
Yes, it is included. Okay, sure.
Take a couple questions at a time here. Does anyone else want to come in? All right, go ahead.
Okay, yes, in our heterogeneity analysis, we basically separate the collective and state-owned. The collective grow a lot more than state-owned, basically. Yeah. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, basically, they run the same estimation, but using the mixed term with collective and the distance. So because most of our collective timber forest land are individualized. So basically use that as proxy to forest tenure reform. I agree. I emphasize to my co-authors, try very hard to, because this is China's characteristics of forest growth. It's not because of anything else. It's basically because of institutional change.
Great. Do we have any other questions or comments or suggestions? They're very
Well,
quiet
I think you
crowd.
should change the title of your paper. Not highway, that's not an exciting issue. This collective reform is much more exciting and important.
The highway is more attractive to my co-authors. Yeah.
I mean, it is sort of controversial the way they put it, given the experience in places like Brazil. I guess one question might be that, do these collective land rights go into place more quickly and more enforceably when you have highways going into place?
Yeah. That's
Because
great insight.
because of the process of putting the highway in place, you actually have to resolve all the collective land issues at the same time.
The policeman comes quicker if you cut down illegally.
Yeah, so. Okay, yes, we have a question here, good.
So I think we actually just talk. So you don't have the collective forest, and then you look at whether they have the similar, the highway connected, they have similar effect or no. You don't have a legal control in terms of tenure system. If you have tenure system, just collective land, see whether they have highway, get same results, or actually like a placebo, right? So you have, but now you have two things together. But if you have only the government-owned land, and then they also have highway connected, then you look at the intensity of load and see whether the forest also grew more or less. That can tease out and see whether the two. Right?
Thank you for the advice. We will do that. But our co-authors have done this way, more like explicit way, implicit way. So we probably emphasize making bigger picture about separated collective and non-collective, show the results. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to now welcome Xiaoshui Zhao from Wesleyan University. Sorry if I butchered your name on the way.
No, that's perfectly right.
She's assistant professor at Wesleyan. Her research interests lie in development economics, political economy, and applied microeconomics. Much of her work explores how political factors in the market, social, and technological constraints faced by developing economies influence institutional choices, and how these choices in turn affect economic outcomes. Great, so we're going to hear another paper about China. And
All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning. My name is Xiaoxue Zhao. It's a great pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to present a project that attempts to examine the impact of China's Grain for Grain program on agricultural productivity. This is joint work with Dandan Li, Yu Liu, and Jinfan Zhang. So let me first spend a couple minutes trying to motivate the project. So payment for ecosystem services, which are programs that provide transfers to landowners to provide ecosystem services, are now widely used around the world as an essential approach to improving ecosystem services, while at the same time maintaining the economic security of those who provide them. While the existing literature has documented the dual effects of PES programs on both environmental protection and poverty reduction, The usual view is that there's a major trade-off between these two potential benefits of PES program, right? So this is because the standard view is that because the poverty reduction effects of PES programs should only arise when the transfers reach infra-marginal households who otherwise would have provided the ecosystem services even without compensation. Therefore, the more successful a PES program is at incentivizing pro-environmental behavior, the less effective it is going to be at delivering economic benefits to participant households. However, is this conventional view about, about the tension or the conflict between the environmental and economic benefits of PES programs really correct? In this paper, we are going to empirically examine the effects of a major PES program in China and argue that such a conventional view, in fact, misses a crucial additional channel through which PES programs can actually deliver economic benefits to participant households, right? So specifically, we are going to argue that in a developing context where land markets are often highly frictional, it's possible for an environmental program that basically subsidize farmers for exiting their land for cultivation to correct pre-existing misallocation in both labor and land allocation, and therefore deliver substantial economic gains that do not necessarily need to come at the expense of the environmental effectiveness of these programs. And to support such an argument, we are going to look at China's Grain for Green program, which is one of the largest PES program in the world, which basically pays farmers transfers to encourage them to stop farming on sloping ground and plant trees, right? So in order to prevent soil erosion and flooding. Since its launch in 1999, China has managed to convert tens and millions of hectares of farmland into forest. And in this paper, we are going to just focus on the first phase of the program, which is a program that for a duration of between 5 to 8 years pays an annual transfer to all rural households that converge eligible land that has a slope greater than 25 degrees into either forest or grassland. So this program was rolled out across 20 provinces in a highly staggered fashion. So the staggered implementation of this program across Chinese counties is going to be the major source of variation that we are going to rely on to identify the effects of this program. So to further to motivate this project even further, right? So when we rely on this heterogeneous timing of implementation of this program across Chinese counties to try to examine the effects of Grain for Green program, right? So first of all, we find that, right? So consistent with the program, intention to encourage conversion of farmland into forests, right? So this massive program indeed, right, significantly reduced the farmland area in affected villages. However, counterintuitively, right, so this significant reduction in farmland area has not led to a corresponding decrease in total agriculture output in the affected villages. Instead, quite counterintuitively, right, so villages that implemented this program, right, in fact experienced a significant increase in their agriculture total outputs. So what could have explained this really counterintuitive positive effects of the program on agriculture output is also a major empirical puzzle that really motivates our projects. So what exactly do we do? Right? So in this paper, so in order to explain this really counterintuitive positive agriculture output effects of the Grain for Green program, we are going to construct a model. And the major objective of this model is to illustrate 3 different channels through which this environmental program that basically subsidizes farmers to exit their land from cultivation could in fact counterintuitively significantly improve agricultural productivity. We then rely on panel data from a nationally representative household survey in China to kind of really examine the program's effects on households' cross-sectoral labor allocation decisions, their farm size, and their production outcomes in order to test all the major predictions of the model. And just to give you a preview of our findings, right, we actually find evidence that strongly support all three predicted channels of how the Grain for Grain program can enhance agricultural productivity. And therefore, right, so our finding really support the argument that PES programs can deliver substantial economic benefits, right, so that go beyond just the direct effects of transfers. So before kind of like I talk, right, give you more details about our model, let me just first give you more background information related to our setting. So in this paper, we are going to focus on rural China during the time period between 1995 and 2008. So in rural China, land is collectively owned at the village level, whereas the use rights of individual plots are distributed and frequently redistributed across households in a highly egalitarian fashion. And because of this land system, right, kind of like at least during the time period that we study, agriculture in rural China is dominated by smallholder farmers with highly fragmented plots, right? So based on our data of our sample, right, so the average farm size of a rural household in China during this time period is just 5 mu, which is around 0.33 hectares. And in addition, right, because of the collective ownership of land and also households' fear of losing their land allocation if they choose to lease their land out to other households, the land leasing market in rural China is highly frictional, right? So despite a large percentage of rural labor that actually work in urban sectors as temporary migrant workers during this time period, the average percentage of households that ever lease out any land in each year is just about 4.67%. And even among households who lease their land to other people, right? So they actually kind of like are both mostly leasing to friends or relatives and receive negligible rents. So given this setting, right, so we construct a model that feature kind of like to try to explain why the Grain for Grain program could potentially enhance agricultural productivity, right? So in our model, right, our model basically features a village in which, right, so households, while facing the same Cobb-Douglas production technology, could differ substantially in their farming ability, right? So in this production function, we use SI to indicate the household-specific farming ability of household I. We assume that all the households in the village face a discrete choice between staying in the rural areas to work in agriculture versus temporarily migrating to urban households in urban sectors in order to receive a non-agricultural wage. In addition, we are going to assume that land leasing market is highly frictional in this setting, and therefore, if a household decides to lease their land to other households, they will only receive a near zero rent. So with such a model, right, so if, right, kind of like think about, right, so the time before the implementation of the Grain for Grain program, we will expect there exists to be substantial misallocation in both kind of a cross-sector labor allocation and cross-household land allocation within the village, right? And this is because, right, so the inability of rural households to lease their land out, right, to other households at reasonable rents will create a significant, right, deterrence to prevent households to work in non-agricultural sectors, and therefore, right, so all households, in fact, right, so face distorted incentives to actually oversupply labor in agriculture. In addition, right, so the existence of high friction in the land leasing market also means that it's unlikely that the marginal revenue product of land can be be equalized across households within the village, and therefore there must be substantial cross-household land misallocation within the village as well. So now let's think about what happens if we introduce the Grain for Grain program, which is basically a program that pays all rural households a transfer to convert their eligible land into forests. So one major effect of such a program is that it creates a really valuable outside option for agriculture land, which significantly decreases the opportunity cost that all rural households face in more efficiently allocating labor to non-agriculture sector. So one major effect of this program is that it's going to significantly increase the probability that rural households exit agriculture and work in non-farm employment, particularly, right, so those households with really low farming ability. And as the low productivity households move out of agriculture, right? So land become more available and be reallocated to the more productive households. So the model allows us to predict three major channels through which, right, such an environmental program that subsidizes land exit can in fact counterintuitively significantly enhance agriculture productivity, right? So number one, there's the labor sorting channel, right? So the idea is that, right, so kind of like as the low productivity farmers exit land, right, with a higher probability after the program, the average farming ability of the farmers that stay in agriculture after the program is going to increase. Second, there's also the land reallocation channel, right? So as the less productive households move out of agriculture, right, their non-eligible land will become more available and be, right, reallocated towards the more productive households, and therefore significantly improve the cross-household land allocation efficiency within the village. Finally, there's also the land consolidation channel, right? So, so as kind of like more farmers move out of agriculture, right, the fact that, right, land will be more concentrated in the hands of fewer farmers that stay behind in agriculture, right, will facilitate, right, will really encourage land consolidation and facilitate scale operations, mechanization, or other technology upgrading that could potentially only be viable when farms reach a certain size. So we use panel data from the National Fixed Point Survey, which is one of the largest rural household surveys in China, plus the rollout timing data across Chinese counties, as well as satellite tree coverage data to test all the predictions of our model. So kind of like in order to examine the causal effects of the Grain for Grain program, we basically kind of estimate a difference in difference model in which we regress a household or a village outcome in a particular year against a post-dummy, which indicates whether the program has been implemented within the village, while controlling for year fixed effects, as well as either a household or village fixed effects, depending on whether the outcome is observed at the household or the village level. In addition, we also use this event study regressions to try to estimate the dynamic effects of the program in order to support the parallel trends assumption underlying our model. So based on our estimates, right, so we find that, right, so the implementation of the Grain for Grain program indeed significantly increases, right, villages' tree coverage, supporting the effectiveness of the program in achieving its environmental objectives. And also consistent with the first order effects of the program in encouraging agricultural households to convert farmland into forests, we also find that the implementation of the program significantly reduced the average land holding of rural households. And more importantly, consistent with our model's assumption, we also find that the implementation of the Grain for Grain program in a village significantly increases the probability that the rural households in a village, in fact, operate zero land and exit agriculture completely. So now let me show you some evidence, right? So to support the various mechanisms that our model predicts, right? So of how the grain for grain program could enhance agriculture productivity, right? So first, the labor sorting effect, right? So kind of like consistent with what our model predicts, we find that the implementation of the program significantly reduces, right, households' labor allocation to agriculture, but significantly increases households' labor allocation to non-farm employment. And more importantly, right, so this reallocation of labor from agriculture to non-agriculture, right, so after the reform is particularly stronger among households with lower initial agriculture productivity. So this strongly supports the labor sorting effects of the program and really suggests that, right, the program should have an important effect in increasing the average farming ability of households that stay in agriculture. Second, right, so in order to test that, right, so in order to show you that, right, so the program also significantly improved cross-household land allocation efficiency, we separate rural households in China into 4 groups based on their pre-reform marginal revenue product of land quartile, right, so in their respective villages. And interestingly, we find that the land reduction effects of the program is predominantly concentrated among households with really low marginal returns from land. For households with high marginal returns on land, they actually experience mild increase in their land holding. So all these results are highly consistent with the program, in fact, significantly improve, right, so cross-household land allocation efficiency within the affected villages. Finally, we also find evidence strongly supporting the land consolidation benefits of the grain for grain program. Right? So in this figure, I basically show you that the implementation of the program in the village significantly increases land concentration, and significantly increases the share of village land that's held by top 10% largest farms within the village. And right, so to examine whether such land consolidation encourages technology upgrading or mechanization within the village, we also examine the effects of the program on input use of the affected households, and we see that, right, so the implementation of the grain for grain program, in fact, significantly increases households' use of machinery, fertilizers, pesticides, and agricultural tools, right? So all these results are highly consistent with, right, the implementation of the grain for grain program significantly improved land consolidation, which really facilitated kind of a mechanization and kind of like a adoption of a more capital-intensive farming technology that could potentially further boost agricultural productivity in the affected villages. So putting everything together, we then examine the direct, kind of like the overall effects of the program on agricultural productivity as well as the total agricultural output within the village. And we find that, right, so among the households that actually stay behind in agriculture, right, so the implementation of the program indeed significantly boosted both their agricultural productivity as well as their agriculture net revenue. And the program also has an overall positive effect on agriculture output. So to conclude, right, so all our results, right, so kind of like really present a highly consistent story. They suggest that, right, in the setting, in the developing setting with a highly frictional land market, it's possible for an environmental program that subsidizes farmers from kind of like exiting their land from cultivation to correct pre-existing inefficiency in both households' labor and land allocation decisions, and therefore deliver economic benefits to participant households that do not necessarily need to come at the expense of the program's environmental effectiveness. And therefore, it's really possible for PES programs to deliver a win-win situation, right? So they can simultaneously improve environmental and economic outcomes. And therefore, from a policy perspective, this really suggest that, right, any cost-benefit analysis, right, of PES programs that ignore the misallocation correction effects of these programs could, right, significantly understate the welfare effects of these programs. All right, thank you very much. I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Xiaoqui. Let's open it up for questions. We start over here, and we'll work our way around the room. We'll take it in groups of 3.
Fascinating presentation, very excellent results. And so I have a hard question. I really want to know, like, under which condition, you said that land friction at that time is very high, so then you can now go out and lease out, or even you have, in some country, you have reallocation risk. So is there any places where you can detect that land rental market has less frictions, and you can see under which threshold of the land rental value that this policy have an impact? So yeah, so then you can see to what extent this policy can have implication for other contexts. So that is my priority question.
Thank you. Can you get near a microphone, please?
Thank you, Xiaoxue, for the interesting study. I have 2 quick questions. Number 1, you mentioned about that this reallocation actually, at the very beginning, will changing the labor use across farm. But later you said that this type of reallocation will generate the total factor productivity improvement at the aggregate level. So my question is that to what extent are you using which way to measure this TFP or labor productivity by using the fixed point, farm survey? The first one. My second question is that at the very beginning, you are talking about the time period you're using the data, which is covering starting from the late 1990s to 2008. And you also mentioned that over this period of time, land reallocation or consolidation is only around 4% of something, right? Because of land rigidity or is not allowing farmers to renting in and renting out heavily. So my question is that there other explanation comes into effect this productivity gain rather than this reallocation. You know what I mean? So a particular interesting point was that, whether you have testing, to what extent over this period of time, farmers using hired labor versus self-employed, because that's essential to the mechanism you are going to test it. I'll stop here.
Thank you. One more question? Yes, the lady in red.
I have 2 questions. First of all, is participation voluntary in this program, or does the government prioritize areas for afforestation, and then all the farmers in that region are supposed to participate? So I wanted clarity regarding the participation. And second question, you mentioned that the agricultural productivity has increased because of land reallocation, and farmers are using chemical intensive cultivation, and because of that also productivity has improved. So does that have any consequence on the environment? The chemical intensive cultivation, does it have any impact on the environment? Because of course you said that environmental outcomes in terms of forest cover has increased, but what about the consequence of the chemical intensification of cultivation? So these are 2 questions which I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and over to you, and we'll probably end after this round of questions, since we're more or less at time. We'll be able to do individually the next set of questions.
All right, so all these are wonderful questions, right? So I probably, right, given the time constraint, I probably won't be able to address all questions adequately, right? So it's between, right, I'm the only thing between you and the coffee break, so I don't want to deter everyone too much. So I'm happy to continue the discussion afterwards, but I would just like to give a few quick responses, right? So first, related to the the extent of friction, right? So whether we can rely on the variation in land leasing institutions across different areas, right? So to further test this hypothesis, right, the answer is yes, right? In fact, right, so this is due to the time constraint, I won't be able to present all the heterogeneous effects results that we have, right? So, but we have indeed done that. We try to measure the extent of friction, right? So in each village and see whether, right, so it's indeed the areas with more frictional leasing market that's driving the results. And we find some results that's indeed consistent with that. But of course, right, so we can talk about whether we actually have the perfect measure for, right, the extent of friction, right? Because we can only use pretty rough measures, probably, right, just the amount of leasing activities in the area. Second, there's a question related to agriculture productivity, right, whether it's within households increase in agriculture productivity versus, right, so the land reallocation effect, right? So that's pretty insightful comment, and that's in fact exactly what we are we notice as well, right? So notice, right, when we only use, right, with the household level regression, right, controlling for household fixed effects, right? So the magnitude of the effect is actually much smaller, and that's indeed consistent, right? Because only the technology upgrading channel is going to affect the household specific agriculture productivity, whereas the land reallocation effect and the labor sorting effect cannot be captured by the household level regression, and that's why, right? So if you look at the overall agriculture output increase in the village is actually of a much larger magnitude compared to the household specific increase in agriculture productivity. But that's consistent with what our model predicts, right? Because there are other channels, the land reallocation and the labor sorting, right? So increasing the average farming ability of people who stay behind, right? So that cannot be captured by this household specific level regression. And there's also the question regarding, right, so whether we see kind of a higher labor in this time period. So the answer is that, right, we have data on that, and the labor market in this time period is also quite thin, right? So our argument is just that, right, exactly because of the land system at the time period, right, so because of the legal ambiguity regarding whether you can really lease land out, right, we have, right, even though kind of like a 20-something percent of labor is migrating to urban areas, right, so only like 4.67% of households is actually leasing any land of theirs, right? So this is suggesting there's definitely a lot of leasing market friction in those during this time period. And same thing with higher labor market, right? So we see even lower percentage of households that actually hire outside labor. So again, right, so labor market is also highly frictional. And there's also the question about, right, so whether this program is really voluntary, right? So that's a great question. That's something that we have been thinking about a lot as well, right? Because based on some surveys with rural households, right, so a lot of people are complaining, right? So this is, right, they are receiving a lot of pressure from local government to make sure that they actually reach the target set by the central government. So we are not trying to argue that this is completely voluntary. So of course, right, so the fact, if this is voluntary, it will have larger land reallocation efficiency improvement. But even if this is not voluntary, all three channels, right, that our model predicts is still going to exist, right? So because the main thing that's causing the labor sorting channel to operate is the fact that there's inefficiency in labor allocation at the beginning, right? So there's oversupply of labor that's trapped in agriculture because of the kind of like land institution, right, imperfect land institution, because of the lack of mobility, right? So and therefore, right, so any program that tries to push labor out of agriculture, in fact, can improve the efficiency. And we also find results supporting that, right? It's really the low farming, right, kind of like the low productive farmers that are moving out, right? So that's right. So we do, right, even if it's not voluntary, we have results that suggest, right, there's definitely kind of like a labor sorting channel that's operating. And same thing with land reallocation, right? So even if this is not voluntary, I think the kind of like all the channels that our model predicts are still going to operate. And of course, I agree, right? So maybe more intensive use of pesticides and fertilizers is going to generate some additional environmental damages, right? So we haven't tested this, right? But of course, that's something that we can test, right? and try to reincorporate. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. We're going to call it now. We're about 5 minutes over time, but I encourage you to follow up. I know there's a series of more questions and observations that you'd like to share. Please join me in thanking all of the speakers today. I think, is one lesson that clearly comes through across all 4 papers is that incentives and design can work if you have strong institutions in place to make it happen. And that's a very important lesson for all of us world bankers who are trying to design these kinds of programs in developing countries. So a big round of applause for everyone, and thank you very much.
Let's get started. I'm Kei Otsuka from Asian Development Bank Institute. I'm the longest friend of Klaus Denninger since 1988. I'm the oldest participant in this conference. I'm 77 now, but in a few days I'll be 78. But my brain is still young, so don't worry about it. Okay, we have various exciting session, tenure, rental markets, and allocative efficiency. And we have 4 speakers, and first speaker is Professor Gon. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Agribusiness and Agriculture Economics at the University of Manitoba. He's going to talk about Nicaragua. I have been to 70 countries so far, but there are exceptions. Egypt I have been to, but other countries like Ukraine, etc., I'm not familiar with. I'd like to learn a lot from your presentations. Professor Gon, why don't you start?
Thanks. So today it's my pleasure to present, although I'm from Canada, from a very cold place. Now it's a warm welcome, so it's good. My pleasure to present one of my dissertation chapters a long time ago, but still working on it. Hopefully receive any constructive comments. So there's a lot of literature talking about the extensive resource allocation effects. So I only mentioned a couple of them that are relevant for the topic. You can be boosting land attached investment if you increase tenant security. You can also boosting productive land transfers or sectoral labor allocations. There are more effects you can mention, gender empowerment. So here I focus on the interaction of any of these 2. The first 2 we have seen, at least in theory, that the option of renting out land can enhance land attached investments. So when I say investments, it could be soil improvements, or it could be terrace, that is mostly in African countries or China. And in Latin America, you're more likely to see the fences, facilities, irrigations, those are physical facilities, and even trees, those are cash crops. And the latter 2 we see in theory empirically and quantitatively. You can have, depending on the context, you may have boosting land transfers, and also at the same time, you increase productivity. However, in China, in early recent data, they show the opposite. If you increase migration, then you have labor productivity reduce. So there's called brain drain from the rural. So I will provide novel evidence from Nicaragua on the interaction of the first 2, and saying that if you choose to renting out the land, you may have to forfeit land attached investment or vice versa. So why this is important? Well, I focus on Latin America. So Latin America has the land ownership distribution is highly unequal. So there is a chance you may have to reduce poverty by reallocating land from large landholders to small landholders, and even landless people. There's a huge amount of landless people. So then the basic argument I think people have seen, and Tenure is here, I think the old work always talking about the essential efficiency gain for pro-smallholders is the imperfect labor market. So you have agency cost of high labor. So instead of I hire out my labor and then work on the large farms, I get a wage. I can rent in the land and work as a family farm. So in equilibrium, you get the wage income increase. So that's the efficiency gain. So in terms of security, if you have a higher security on both sides, then the large landholders may feel safer to rent out land to the tenants who are potentially smallholders and landless people. So that's why it can have a poverty reduction gain. However, in reality, you find something puzzling that, at least in Nicaragua, there's a bunch of papers, including my advisor and Deininger, that there's a significant increase in land attached investments, but only a mild or sometimes even reduction in land rental markets after salient land titling restoration in the late 1990s, which is the early reform of the program. So these people were going to resolve this puzzling. I still find the contemporary puzzle here, so I provide resolve this puzzle by showing that the investment benefit of higher land ownership security can actually discourage a lot of landholders from renting out the land. To rationalize this, I provide a sophisticated theoretical argument. I think some referees really hate that, but I would say that's because I want to make sure that I don't create things mechanically in theory, so I build a very complex theory. So the theory basically in language is easy, so that the landlords face a trade-off between investing in attached capital renting out land, while there's a context-specific friction here is that the landlords prefer a flexible short-term rental leasing anyways, or there's a legal cap on the land leasing durations, okay? So either way, you will see in reality, even contemporary data, you see that land leasing durations are almost below 1 year, okay? Regardless of whether you have a higher or lower land tenure security, okay? So given that restriction or the context fact, then you will see tenants may, in theory, have insufficient incentive to take care of your land attached capital if you invested that. Okay, so then you have a concern whether I should do the investment by myself and cultivate it, or I do less investment or even no investment, that's common, and then you rent out. Okay, so then you have this trade-off. So the theoretical prediction of this model is saying, okay, if everything else is equal, if landholders with a higher initial investment capacity and then combined with a higher security, then you do more investment because you're more capable to do so, right? Then you would see that you're less likely to rent out land. We do find that, okay? So this is the overall results. We mostly rely on the World Bank's land administration program they call PRODEP. The recent literature show that it has improved land ownership security perception. We find similar results, and then we find more. It's a resource allocation aspect. On average, you see these programs increase land attached investments, mostly trees and not as cash crop trees, but reduce the area of rented out land. And these unbalanced effects are more pronounced among large landowners, especially those who have better access to credit. And we also find exciting, but some minor results is that after program participation, small landed households migrate more, whereas the large landed households migrate less. I will explain why this is the case. So the data we have is the household survey data from Rural Business Development Project. I think it's MCC's project. It's not RCT in the beginning. So those farmers will have some experience on certain crops and livestock, and they will be randomly selected at the community level. And the program is randomly assigned at the community level as well. And so the sample of interest, they have 3 rounds of survey, but I will only focus on the first 2 rounds, which is between 2007 and 2009. This time is very important. I will mention that later on. So then during this period, you have about 20% of the households will participate in programs, and there's land security program, not the rural business program. And then later on, there's limited participation. That's why I cut that to 3rd round. And then also, because of identification strategy, I only focus on the household who had not participated in any security improvement program yet in the baseline. So basically, I'm comparing the switchers versus the never takers. So the land ownership security in this context is mostly overlapping claims. It could be, one of the reasons is the incomplete land agrarian reforms. So in the old days, and when the Sandinistas governments came in, they confiscated the land and redistributed to the poor people. However, they didn't transfer the legal titles because they are not legal to do so, and they didn't even compensate much as legally to the confiscated large landholders. when the new government came and they come back to the private land ownership, they say you can claim back your land. And they also settle some of the conflicted soldiers, so then that creates more claims, so that generally inflate the overlapping claim issue. I think the 1990s, we have some programs to fix that, but still contemporarily, we still see in the data there's a conflicts that documented. So the major program is the World Land Administration Program, which I said has improved security, but mostly they're doing things systematically. So they demarcate the land boundaries and resolve ownership conflicts if there's any, and then in the end, go to title and register the land, okay? So it's a very comprehensive program. That's why they increase security. The other programs have similar approaches we saw in the data, so we combine these two as one. So if you're a program participant, you participate in either of these programs. The potential or the most challenging thing in this kind of empirical research is the participation not random. So I will control for confounding factors. I will use some kind of econometric techniques to test to what extent the results holds into selection issue to unobservables. Okay, so this is the summary statistics. We have the household members are mostly 5 above, mostly male, and age is about 50. Education relatively low, but I think it's good at that time, but close to 4. And then you have security improvement, program improvement increases. The area also increased a little bit. Part of them is because they purchased land after the program. Manzana is 1.74 acre. So it's very huge. This is very large land. So that's why it gives us the power to test that theory that large landholders, how do that respond to the security program. And the outcome variable, we have a bunch of investments in attached facilities like fancy irrigation systems and trees. These are the cash crops like mango, citrus, and coconut, cashew stuff. And so I measure so yeah, the past 2 years, do you have planted trees? How many trees you have planted in past 2 years? So remember our period is from 2007 to 2009. So every 2 years you measure that. And the renting out land, because there's limited renting out, you can see it's only 6 or 5%. So I also construct the dummy variables and the area of rented out land. For the robustness check, we have agriculture credit use. That's the key part. We have the credit data. So we can see whether they change the credit usage for agriculture usage. And there's some trend you can see in the data, which later on I will use the community level fixed effects to control the trend. In order to investigate the program participation, we use lasso and stepwise choice to select potential baseline outcomes and related demographics to predict to what extent that you're going to participate in the second round. So you can see in the end, we have you feel safer than you don't like to participate. You're less likely to participate. If you have a highest public deed documents, you're less likely to participate. If you are too old, then you're also less likely to participate. Interestingly, if you have a better education, you're also likely to participate. One of the reasons could be that this process is lengthy. You have to go, especially for the last one, you have to go to the office to register. So there's a time cost, or you may rely on less likely in agricultural production, right? And then for the investment part, you see the negative association. I think some people will get puzzling, but the reason is that they perceive that if you have investment, you think you have a higher land ownership. So that's the answer to the question in the questionnaire. So that's my hypothesis. And then you have renting in land. I don't know why, but it seems like they negatively associated with the program enrollment. Of course, we can control all the community fixed effects, so which means community, if the politics can think, oh, I want to join this program or forced to join the program, it will be controlled for. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky here. I think most referees doesn't like, but I want to be specific. This is on ANCOVA model with controls. So anyone have heard ANCOVA model? Yeah, so ANCOVA model is more efficient than traditional DID in the sense they control the lack of autocorrelation paths. You can see the left-hand side is the outcome variable. Right-hand side, you have the lack of outcome variable, it's baseline variable. and then you have the program enrollment, which is in second round, and then you have a bunch of controls basically to see, to tease out the endogeneity on the program enrollment factor. And this is basically saying this cross-sectional setup can allow me to examine the omitted variable bias due to unobservable following the recent technique. Author has published in the GBS Econometric Journal. And so we use that to test to what extent our omitted variable bias will be. And we are robust. Our results are mostly the lowest bound. So our results could be strengthened if we can include omitted variable bias. And there's a technical note that what is the relation between this model and the DID. I don't want to spend much time here. There's a bunch of literature talking about the covariance specific trend. So this is basically, there's confounding factors, cumulative fixed effects are basically the different trends that are associated with the different individuals. Before going to the results, I want to emphasize what defines large landholders. Remember in the theory, you have large landholders. In my theory is that you have the high in labor, which exposed to the agency cost of labor. So I distinguish between short-term and long-term because there's literature talking about the short-term labors. Then you can create this inverse U-shaped relationship, etc. So I focus on the long-term labor, which you live with the household and you have to be monitored. So then I choose a threshold where you're more likely to hire long-term labor rather than the short-term labor. And they have a lot. If you look at the number of days, they have 100,000 days hired, which I didn't show here. This is the fraction of household high-end labor. And then on the right-hand side, you see the formal credit access part. They have the perceived access and actual usage. And you can see the threshold I choose also coincide with the big flattening here. So that means that you have a high level of high-end labor and a high level of access to credit. That's the condition the theory predicts that you may face the trade-off. Okay. 15 manzanas is most likely against 26 acres, exceeding the traditional machinery scale at that document in the JPE paper. So the main results we find that if you, on average, you see the agricultural credit usage increases, planting trees increases a little bit. It's mild, but if you split the sample, even though I run the regression jointly, so it's not actually subsample analysis, and then you can see that large landholders, you do more, you use more credit, and you invest more in trees, and you reduce the area of rented out land. Now the question is, can we test the mechanisms, right? So I used the formal credit supply shocks that happened in Nicaragua in 2008. So there's two channels, two shocks. One is the reduced formal credit supply due to the national microfinance crisis, which originally come from in the northern area and then penetrated into the area of interest here in 2009. So mostly exogenous to the area we are interested in. But because of the branches, so they affect the area. The second part is the benchmark lending rate cut because of the global financial crisis. So to support this argument, I provide the data here. So the formal credit you can see on the panel A reduced and informal one increases. And if you aggregate them by district group, which is the exposure to formal credit, you can see the black bar is the one who has initially high formal credit, so they are exposed to the shock much more than the other side. You see mostly concentrated in those districts. And if you look at the agriculture credit, the quantity of those districts decreases, and also the interest rate increases. While on the other hand, you see the mild increase in credit and a slight reduction in credit interest because of the interest cut. Okay. So then you see whether we can use that leverage to see to what extent the credit market plays an important role. And we do see that if you have a low exposure, then after the credit shocks, in companion with the land security improvements, you see a huge increases in agricultural credit usage, a huge increase in tree planting, and a huge reduction in the renting outside. And we find related impact in terms of the other allocations. You see the migration increase a lot for smallholders, but you also see the increase a lot of the land area. So basically there are two subgroups within the small landholders. One chooses to stay, one chooses to migrate. So that's why you see both. Okay, and then on the other hand, you only see that they didn't migrate, they mostly increase the land and use more labor, if any. Okay, so I do a bunch of robustness checks. I think yesterday I also do other robustness checks. I hope you can have more questions so I can answer them, whether I did in the right direction or not. So the Auster bond, we're going to be robust. So just give you a chance to see if you don't know what is Auster robust bond. Seems like not working. Okay, I will wait to the end. So, this paper have a relation to the literature about the broader literature talk about interplay of land misallocation and market frictions. I personally want to explore how the unbalanced investment and rental supply effects will affect labor allocation across different sectors in Latin America or Nicaragua similar context. Thank you for your time, and this is the Auster bound, and mostly we are lower bound. So that means our results are robust to omitted variable bias. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Ngom. So floor is open for questions. I'll take maybe 3 comments in the beginning. Who want to raise questions? Everybody is convinced? No? Yes.
Just because I didn't know the policy background so well, so can I use the microphone? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, not knowing the policy background that well. This result is, upon understanding it the way you have laid it out, do you think it's disappointing for the program designers, or it's really good because the investments were so good and now you do a next twist now that you understand this opportunity cost raising, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I have a follow-up working paper on the general equilibrium effects. So it seems like we achieved the investment, but we didn't achieve the land reallocation from large to small. So then maybe the question is, okay, what is the fundamental welfare we care about? Because the investment can also complement labor hiring, then the wage rate can go up as well. And we do find that, and then we do some kind of factor to see that if we fix the rental market frictions and how the welfare will be increased more, and we do find that you can increase much more. So there's a way to fix the land rental markets, and I still don't know exactly where that friction comes from, but the data tell that there must be a friction, a lot of them. And then so then the question for policymakers is to identify these land rental frictions case by case, and then try to fix it if it is possible, cost effective. Then you can achieve this win-win scenario that both the investment and the output increase, but also the inequality will reduce. The poor people are going to enjoy higher income gains from those programs. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, please.
Yeah, thanks. Very, very interesting paper. So if I understood correctly, the data collection comes from a randomized control trial of a MCC intervention. So can you tell us more? And can you study interactions with treatment?
Yeah, I tried. It seems like the program itself is more likely focused on the movable capital, which is the equipment you can have. And I think my advisor have a paper GD on that, and they find that there's significant impact on the movable capital. And when I try to interact with them, and I find is that there is a positive enhancement, that if you have a more movable capital, you're more likely to do investment and renting out less land, but their significance are very mild, so I didn't report it, but it is there, yeah.
So anything else? Yeah, I have a question. You did not mention about mechanization.
Yeah.
But the farm size is quite large. So landlords there are scale economies, and so landlords may have incentive to expand the farm size further.
Yeah.
That analysis is missing in your presentation.
Yeah, exactly. I have 1 or 2 paragraphs talking about that. So if you compare the Rosenweg and their papers on the GPE talking about the economic scales, so they have a threshold of 24.3 acres, and our minimum threshold we choose here is 50 manzana, which is 26 acres. So And also I vary, so that means the farms that I choose for large landholders are mostly, they already achieved the maximum machinery scale. So there's no further room for them to achieve. But anyway, we tried to change the threshold a little bit, and from 15 to 20 manzanas, and we didn't find any kind of offsetting effects. We still have the results were robust to that. Yeah, but that's a good question.
So anything else? Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next speaker is Daniel Ali from Ethiopia. He just came back from Ukraine several years ago. So he's going to talk about Ukraine, which is obviously a very exciting topic. And I'm looking forward to listening to your excellent presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Key, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to present our work that sits at the intersection of land economics, industrial organization, and as you will see, very timely policy questions for Ukraine and well beyond. The paper is titled Testing for Market Power in Agricultural Land Markets, Evidence from Ukraine. Just to set the stage from the outset, we are looking only at agricultural land for commercial use, and our study sample is legal entities who or that participated in lease and or sales market from 2021 up to 2024. It is a joint paper with Klaus Deininger. Hopefully he will answer all the difficult questions. So the core question is simple. When a large farm dominates the local markets, does it use that position to pay landowners less than it otherwise would? And if so, how much? Let me start with why this question matters and why Ukraine is the right place to ask it. The concern is monopsony, a market structure where buyers have enough market power to push prices below competitive levels. We know this happens in labor markets, and there is growing evidence in output markets as well. But in agricultural markets, especially in the developing world, we know nothing. So this is the gap we are trying to fill. Ukraine provides us a clear setting for this analysis. I think as we heard over the last 2 days, it has one of the most concentrated agricultural sectors in the world, where large agri-holdings control millions of hectares alongside with millions of individual landowners who received their land when at Soviet Union breakup. And for the last 3 decades, or over the last 3 decades, there has been a restriction or a moratorium on land sales. So land rental market was the only option that allows land to pass hands. But the restriction was lifted in July 2021, partially lifted in 2021. And then it was lifted for legal entities in January 2021. So this creates a sales market, and we have high quality administrative data, over 500,000 leases, and over 200,000 sales transactions for this analysis. The policy relevance is direct. If market power suppresses land markets or land rents, reform efforts that rely on competitive markets to raise smallholder welfare will fall short without complementary competition policy. So I think I already talked about this, but just to mention one thing is that prior Ukraine work focuses on welfare effects of lifting the moratorium, tenure security, and land consolidation or structural transformations. So we make contributions in 4 areas. A rigorous testing of monopsony power in a large-scale agricultural land market using transaction-level administration data, a novel identification strategy based on within-farm cross-market variation that allows us to compare the same farm across a different local market, a quantification of welfare effect, and a monitoring framework that other countries can replicate using their own registry data. So a few facts about the Ukraine context. I think I touched upon this also a little bit. Ukraine has about 32 million hectares of agricultural land, and I talked already about the ban on the sales market and the opening up of the sales market gradually in 2021 and then for legal entities in 2024. And there are indeed, as has been talked about it over the last 2 days, dominant operators in Ukraine, even up to more than 100,000 hectares. So the relevant market unit in our analysis is the village council. That is the smallest administrative unit, averaging about 50 to 70 square meters. And I think there's also the Russian invasion that started in February 2022 that disrupted the market, but did not eliminate transactions. So our data, the core data source is the state geocadastre, Ukraine's official land registry. We have, as I mentioned earlier, more than 500 lease transactions and more than 200,000 sales transactions spanning 2021 to 2024 at the parcel level, with information on price, duration, area, cadastral ID, and legal entity ID of the tenant or buyer. So one thing that I would like to highlight in terms of the key identification advantage is the unique legal ID that allow us to track the same farmer across multiple village councils, which is the foundation for our within farm identification strategy. So descriptive statistics tell us a clear story. Legal entities control about or account about 90% of leases, whereas only 10% of sales. I think this is reflecting the relatively new opening of the sales market for legal entities. This is just to show you the dynamics of the volume of lease transactions. You clearly see that legal entities are quite dominant in the lease market, and they also pay slightly higher than individual tenants. But then, as you clearly see, since February 2002, both transactions and prices were pushed down. But they are still resilient after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think we see the same trend for sales transactions, but there was interruption right after the war, when the war started. But otherwise, transactions are happening, and you clearly see after January 24, you see legal entities buying land in the sales market or agricultural land, and they also pay slightly higher than that of individual buyers. So parcel sizes are very small, about 2.27 hectares for lease transactions, and about 3 hectares for sales transactions. But holdings are, the average holding size for legal entities is about 1,500 hectare, and they are operating in up to 6 village councils. That is what we are trying to exploit in our analysis. So let me walk through the empirical strategy. So the concern here is unobserved farm characteristics. So cross-farm comparisons might be misleading. So the solution that we are using is tenant fixed effects that controls for also for time fixed effects that absorbs aggregate shocks, including the war, as well as the sales market opening. So our measure of market power is the share of land of the legal entity in a village council at time t minus 1, and we use 2 kinds of indicators. One is a categorical indicator, either less than 10% of the village land, 10 to 33%, and greater than 33%. We also use the continuous market or land share in the village council operated by the legal entity. So I think the identification strategy is direct. As I said, the average tenant operates in about 6 village councils, comparing what the same farm pays across markets with different dominance levels, isolate market power from farm level unobservables. So the main result from the lease market is that dominant farms pay systematically less. So the left panel shows the categorical specification, and the right one is the continuous specification. So relative to village councils where the tenant controls less than 10% of land, the same tenant paid 4% less where it controls 10 to 33%, and 7.5% less where it controls more than 33% of the village council land. And I think we get similar results from the continuous market share. And as I mentioned earlier, time fixed effects capture 2 aggregate shifts in lease prices. That is sales market opening in July 2021 and the Russian invasion in 2022. Just to show you, so you clearly see there is like a 10 to 15% increase right after the opening of the land market, but then after February 2022, you see push down in lease prices. So we have done some robustness check as well. One is to look at lease duration. So VCs or village councils with more than 33% share, have 3.3% longer lease contracts. So this compounds the welfare loss. Landholders pretty much locked in at a below market rates for extended periods. I would have shown you the figures, but I think moving between these two is a little bit time taking. So I will just, if I can show it later if there is time. And also we get the same result for the sales markets, even if the sales market was open or we have only 1 year data for the sales market. We see dominant farmers paying 2 to 6% less for parcels. So we can say that market power detectable despite lower overall concentration in the nascent market. The other thing is informality externality. I think it would be good to show this one. So the left panel is for lease, and the right panel is for sales prices. So as I mentioned earlier, informality, we measured it using the machine learning detected or derived maps of agricultural fields. So from that, we look at what percentage of the land or the cultivated land is registered in the cadastre. So what we clearly see that unmapped area share in the field has a negative effect both in lease prices and sales prices, even if the sales price is slightly not precisely estimated compared to that of the lease prices. So what we can say from this result is that informal cultivation reduces effective competition for neighboring formal landowners. The other thing is, I think we can take the war as a natural experiment on shocks. So we looked at the village level, the impact of the conflict on the incidence of transactions, on number of transactions, on number of participants in the market, as well as price. We clearly see that transaction volumes fell sharply in war-affected regions, and overall lease and sales prices also declined, even though the prices are slightly a bit more resilient than volume of transactions. The other thing we did was, we looked at if market power, heterogeneity of market power by pre and post-war. We wanted to see whether this market power is a structural issue or whether it is induced by shock. We clearly find out that for those who are controlling 33% of the share, no additional war effect. Market power already fully exercised before the war. But for the groups with 10 to 33 share, war interaction is negative and significant. That means reduced competition, deepened markdowns for this group of farmers. So this is the figure. I mean, you clearly see the before war was insignificant for tenants that use 10 to 33% of the village, but then it becomes highly significant after the war. But for the tenants who use more than 33%, we don't see a difference before and after the war. Okay. So the key takeaway is that market power is structural, and the war didn't create it, but reduced competition amplified it for the farmers or the tenants who are cultivating 10 to 33% of the village land. So and then finally we did some back of the envelope calculation, and we see that welfare flows from smallholder landowners to large agri-holding operators. it's about in the range of 20 million US dollars per year. This is, in fact, a regressive transfer embedded in the market structure. So I think one other thing is that eliminating unregistered cultivation, which is roughly about 5%, would raise price for neighboring farm landowners by about 1.5%, which could be, of course, achievable through administrative reform alone. So in terms of policy implications, the first one is the sales ban was counterproductive. By eliminating buyer competition, the ban likely wasn't a lease market monopsony. So blunt quantity restriction seem a poor substitute for market regulation. So it is important to monitor dominant farm thresholds, enable enforcement actions where concentration suppresses prices, and reducing informality or externality and makes, of course, price manipulation harder to sustain. And it could be used as a replicable monitoring framework where registry and cadastre data are sufficient to detect market power in real time. There is no need to conduct surveys, and it could be applicable in other countries such as Brazil, South Africa, and the US, and beyond. So to conclude, we tested for monopoly power in Ukraine, land market using more than 500,000 leases and 200,000 sales transactions with a tenant fixed effect strategy. We found that dominant farms pay 4 to 7% less in lease prices. They secure longer leases, compounding losses to landowners. Same pattern emerge in the sales market. Market power is structural and not induced by the war. And more than 20 million US dollars per year is being transferred from small landholders to large agri-operators. So what it means, land market reform must be paired with competition policy. Administrative data enables real monitoring at low cost, and findings are relevant well beyond Ukraine. I will stop here and looking forward to your questions.
Excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. So, other questions? Yes, one, two. Okay. Let me pick up two.
Thank you. So thank you for your presentation. My question is, how do you distinguish the monopolism power from alternative mechanisms such as the long-term contracting relationship and also the risk sharing or lower transaction costs for larger operators? So that's my question. Yeah. Thank you.
Really cool paper. I'm kind of interested in what causes markets to be concentrated and what causes a firm to enter into a new market. I think that's just interesting in its own right, and it could be a bit of an endogeneity concern if, for example, more dominant firms are entering these villages where they would get a smaller share because they're kind of cherry picking like a really good plot, and that plot, and you pay higher for that plot. I know you can control for, linearly control for observable land attributes, but it might be a little bit more complex than that.
Okay, Ari.
Yeah, I mean, the first question is, of course, how to distinguish market power from other mechanisms. So what, as I said, what we looked at is compare the price paid by a single operator across different villages, depending upon the amount of land it is cultivating across these villages. And we managed to control for the legal entity or the farm fixed effect. So we believe that that may give us a clean estimate of market power, because it all depends on how much they are cultivating across different village councils. I think what causes market concentration, I think the Ukrainians in the room may be able to answer this question. Of course, I think it is the same answer, because one, we have tried to control for all kinds of parcel characteristics, including distance to infrastructure, soil quality, land cover, whether it is cultivated land, fallow, or permanent crops on the field. I think we believe that this controlling for that, help us, I think, to minimize that endogeneity, and of course the farm fixed effect also addresses some of the endogeneity issues.
Klaus, would you like to say anything?
Can I? So I had.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I had 2 questions. So the first is, if I understand correctly, your identification is coming from looking at the same corporate farm in let's say 2 different communities, one in which it has, for example, 10% share versus another one where it has 80% share. Are you also controlling for the overall extent of market competitiveness within each location? So let's say the location where it has 10% share, how many other corporate farms are there? So is it all by only one, or is it another 9 farms that have 10%? So the overall extent of competition, if you're controlling for that. And then my second question, more big picture question. So can we think about this market power of being a source of land misallocation in the case of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think for your first question, we control for either the number of participants in the market, in the local market, or we also control for the number of transacted parcels in that village council. So we believe that proxies for or captures some of the competition in the local markets. In terms of misallocation, I think that's a good question. The only issue we are having is finding good data in terms of yield and that. I think there has to be, there used to be data collected by the Statistics Office, but recent data is not accessible at the moment. But I think it is a good thing to look at misallocation as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Great paper. So there's kind of an alternative, maybe too naive, but an alternative interpretation where there's kind of a local premium. If you're the large landowner, you have a long-term relationship with the people that are there, and they actually value that, and that's why they are willing to receive less of a payment. So I wonder whether you could tell apart those, like if you can control for a dummy that is actually with a place where a farm, an agribusiness has the larger share, which will be like their headquarters, to differentiate that possible kind of local premium.
Yeah, I don't think of anything off my mind now, but I think it is something worth exploring. I think we can chat, I think, after this, if you have any idea that you would be able to suggest.
Thank you. Really nice paper. Going completely different directions. I mean, this is a place with serious economic drama here, but war is also a big deal. And war is just war here, but I feel like war isn't the same everywhere in space. And I might have missed it. I couldn't quite tell if we could imagine that war is having more influence in some places than in others. It may be that these are all concentrated enough with the same war effect, but I wasn't sure. The second question was, you mentioned regressive transfer, and getting rid of the informality would help, but I'm actually not sure who the informal folks are. Like, I don't know if it's regressive to get rid of informality. I was just wondering who those people are.
Yeah, I think the results on this one here, the way we try to identify it is, whether village councils damaged or directly affected by the war, whether there is a significant decrease in volume or prices. So this is the identification strategy. These are the villages were directly affected by the war. So if there is any damage, any of those kind of things, that is what we looked at. I think that maybe address your concern there. No, it's not binary. It is.
It's based on remote sensing, and
yeah.
I mean it's satellite imagery. So I think, we try to identify these the villages, and I think for the informality, maybe you have to show the other picture, because that is all. This one here, yes. So I think the way the fields in Ukraine look like is, so I think the light green ones are the ones that are actually in the cadastre.
Yeah.
The other ones, so the yellow boundary is the machine learning identified parcel boundaries. We have these boundaries for the whole of Ukraine. And then we take the percentage of, I think, so in this case, it's about 15% or something that is informal. And essentially what we find is that the informality affects the price of the neighboring parcels. Because, of course, that means, it weakens enforceability, because you have somebody sitting on that land who could, and you cultivate that land as one, because that is from the machine learning that you see the homogeneous crop cover on that parcel. So it's likely that one operator operates these parcels, this parcel, but he has some informality on the field, and that reduces the lease price for a neighboring parcel. But that, of course, that is only an auxiliary thing. I think that is not the main story. I think the main story really is, and there probably, I think, two things. One is land markets are land is very immobile in Ukraine, because so I think that is because at privatization, most of the large landowners locked in 49-year leases. So because then I think land was worth virtually nothing. So they were, and of course I think it was the old communist bosses who had the social relations to the farm workers. So they just got everybody some vodka and signed them with long-term leases. And sorry, this is anecdotal, but that is probably a little bit how it happened. And I think there has been now a lot. So I think in 2015, a law was passed to establish a minimum lease duration of 7 years. And we have some results here, which Daniel didn't present, on the lease duration, or some descriptive that you see that actually, in terms, I don't know whether you have these on the slides or not, that in terms of the lease duration, you have a big, which is completely counterintuitive. You have a big discount for long-term leases. So we have three lease terms. Okay, you go ahead. I think, yes. No, that is one on the lease term, but also in terms of the payment that you receive for the lease. So I think if you think rationally, you should have a positive. The longer the lease is, the higher the payment for it, because that gives the tenant long-term security. But you see that happening between 7 and 12 years, but beyond 12 years, you see a steep drop of about 15%, which I think indicates that, and unfortunately we don't have socioeconomic characteristics on the tenants, because that, of course, would be needed to nail that argument. But most likely these are the babushkas and the old women who don't know better, and who get just tricked into some lease arrangements that is not very favorable to them. And of course, what Tasso said is very relevant, I think, and we hope that by middle of this year, we actually will get the productivity data, because these productivity data are collected. Every farm has to report to the statistics service about their, of course, it's a Soviet time form, But it still, I mean, it gives us, we analyzed that before, and it gives the basic productivity characteristics. And then, of course, then I think that would really allow to make the argument that what we observe in a very descriptive way here actually has productivity consequences. And also, I think one thing which we did before the access to the thing was stopped, and which probably will be useful to mention, is that there is also a negative correlation, even though I think we cannot, between wages paid and the competition in local land markets. So I think that, again, that is a descriptive thing, but that points to the same direction, that you really, I mean, that you have market power rather than just a good relationship with your tenants. And these tenants actually benefit, and you share some risk or whatever, and you provide them with good access to output markets, which I think, of course, is a story that you could tell with this data, but I think which doesn't really match. Thank you.
Very good. I hope you'll continue to work in Ukraine. The paper will appear in AER very soon. Okay, thank you very much. Next speaker is Professor Pfaff from Duke University. He's a distinguished professor there, and he's a professor of public policy, economics, and environment at Duke University. So, floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. So this is, whoa, it went away. Oh, no, it's back. Something rather different. You know, it's related in the sense that we've seen it is helpful to own your land. Control of the land is useful. Various forms of nice demonstration, quantitative work. This is a much more qualitative exploration of people making trade-offs in order to gain control of land. So that's the connection, and here we go in a different direction. So I am calling this conditional rights, what I'm talking about. This is a group who will probably have many other better names, but I'll go with conditional rights until you tell me afterwards. And voluntary conservation. So what is going on? Vulnerable locals whose exclusion rights are weak, they have a hard time excluding others. They can improve their exclusion by providing global public goods or conservation. So there's a local rights-based control of your land is good reason to provide global public goods. For me, that's important. I'm watching, you know, many, my next couple slides will be about this, conservation policies not necessarily work that well. I think often because they are not locally compatible. I'm constantly now in the hunt for when locally compatible incentives, thinking about poverty SDGs, are what will allow lasting conservation impact. That's things I'm trying to find in the world. Another way of saying what I'm going to do here is, I noticed that people were saying something I thought was very odd, which is, please restrict me, which doesn't sound maximizing. And so the voluntary private adoptions of public restrictions, could you please come and limit me? I thought sounded strange. I tried to figure out why. I think what it suggests is that if you are threatened or heavily competed, that may set up this win-win conservation in which there are local gains from providing global public goods. And in particular, I think these conditions address very standard challenges for both rights-based conservation, PAs, and incentives-based conservation. So I'll just try to lay out why this sort of sad setup, people's rights are being violated, at least sets up in principle, I think, win-win interventions. That was what I was thinking. I've gone in search of cases. I've tried to find them. David Wupper joined after my last opportunity to present. So just so you all know, your role, in addition to telling me better words than conditional rights, is to give us even more cases, please. So that would be lovely. Please be racking your brain for things you know that work like this, or things that don't. Okay. So first, I'm going through challenges for conservation policies. So zoning or protected areas, generally, I think rights compatibility helps impact non-compatibility not. So I will refer to what I call fortress failures. A lot of protected areas have sort of fortress conservation, keep people out. And let's acknowledge that, of course, some protected areas have had impacts. But if they have impacts, why is that? It's because they limit people's production, right? They are taking away use rights. That's the whole theory behind the impact of a protected area. So what happens? People say, I don't like that. So they push protected areas away. So in work that, for instance, Ken Chometz has worked like this from long ago, people are pushing away protected areas to where, yeah, the great idea, you should conserve over there, right? And you should conserve over there, not only where I don't produce, but really where it's not very productive to produce. So you get protection pushed away from places you want to go. So we don't even get a PA. And then you have not protected. Yeah, sure, you have a protected area, good luck keeping me out of it, right? Because I actually want to produce, I want to extract trees, I want to extract ore. So a lot of protected areas are failing because they're not actually protecting. They do exist, but they're not stopping people from going in because, of course, people like the right to control land, as has just been demonstrated. And then there's what if you actually succeed and create a protected area that keeps someone out and has impacts, it is imposing costs. There's a pretty significant set of data, and not everyone is aware of it, on PAD, protected area, downsizing, degazettement, and downgrading. So protected areas get lowered in their strictness, they get shrunk, and they just get eliminated. So if you do a good job, the reward is sometimes people are like, well, what are you doing stopping me? Let's get rid of the protected area, right? So that's pretty good story, a simple story. People don't like losing their rights for why I think protected areas often don't either exist or have protection. And on the other hand, more compatibility or focus on local rights could help. Multiple use protected areas in which there are some local smallholder rights very clearly are different. I believe they have a higher probability of acceptance upon being proposed. That data doesn't really exist. But for instance, again, following our global paper in 2009, Ken Chometz here at the bank did a global paper in which for stopping fires, multiple use protected areas did a better job, despite allowing people to produce inside, preventing fires than did strict protected areas. So in terms of allowing protected areas to arise, including where something is actually going on, because you can't have impact if there's nothing going on, protected areas far, far away from everything just don't do anything because there's nothing to be done. First, they're more likely to be accepted, and second, sometimes the smallholders are willing to monitor. That's going to essentially be the theme of this paper. So there's not a universal result on multiple use and strict, but that's actually striking, that letting people produce doesn't necessarily make it worse for conservation outcomes. And then logging concessions. I actually have papers on logging concessions doing a better job protecting forests than protected areas. So how is that possible? It's sort of obvious, right? So many protected areas are not actually protected, as just noted. In logging concessions, I am not saying that concessionaires love nature or love you or anyone else, but I can tell you this, that they consider the following sentence is true. To maximize profit, I should keep you out. Second, they have the capacity to keep people out. So even a contract to cut trees with the right capacity and control of the land, this is in Peru, does a better job protecting the trees than a protected area, right? So that's consistent with, we really got to think through the incentives and the capacities of people on the ground. Okay, so that's the whole rights side of things. And so I'm thinking about giving people rights could allow them to go for conservation. Why don't you just block rights? Because it doesn't really always work. Alternatively, you could give them other stuff, right? You could say, hey, please conserve, I'll give you other stuff. Well, that's incentives or ecosystem services payments, which have had their own challenges. I'll go with contracting calamities there instead of fortress failures. Let's acknowledge that some PES have had impacts. When do they not? When they're not even conditioned at all. So there are sometimes announced unconditional transfers. I'll give you money, I hope you'll save the forest. It usually doesn't work. Unsurprisingly, it only works if by chance local incentives are aligned, which can happen sometimes. Alternatively, there's the ones that say they're conditioned and they don't even bother to condition. That's probably most PES in the world, right? They don't really condition on anything. So there's not an incentive to do anything because you don't really have to do what you said you were going to do. Okay, then there's, I'll use maybe a rude term, dumb conditions. So there are incentives in which we literally do a good job contracting. We carry out the condition. Classic example with no country names being used is a very famous incentive program which pays you to keep a tree standing. If the tree is still standing at the end of the year, you get paid. Great idea. What does the farmer say? Any tree? They say, yeah, any tree. Like the one on that slope that I can't even climb, so I would never cut? Totally. What happens, people come running in to get paid to leave the tree standing on the slope that they cannot climb, right? So it's conditioned, it's monitored, but it doesn't do anything, right? Because you only get paid for things that were going to be that way anyway. Okay, and then we have ho-hum conditioned, which is we condition it on something with additionality, but we pay you this much. So that affects about this much behavior, right? So there's a lot of payments that are really just quite small, right? So you carry it all out, you do all that, and you're comparing it to palm oil, right? Or anything you want, this much just doesn't change the margin all that much. So there's some real challenges. So what do you want? You want a big incentive. Gosh, if you were seeing a conference like this, what would be a big incentive? Control of your land, right? So that's what's just been demonstrated. So that's where we're going. So what about the focus on incentives here? I'll mention just a different, let's talk about big incentives. Do they work? Yeah, they do. If you can measure and give a big incentive, sure, it works. Standard micro works, but it's got to be significant. So like the Brazil's blacklist says, if you do not lower the measured deforestation in a municipality, and boy, can a satellite measure forest in a municipality, right? That's really measurable. Then we will cut off ag credit. So in this case, it's cutting off a subsidy, but it's a big one, and you control it, and boom, deforestation rate went down. So yes, if you control things that matter a lot to people and you measure stuff, do incentives work? Yes. That's not most programs. And so now we make the transition to where I'm going. I'm going to say something that doesn't look like an incentive, but it kind of is, which is back to multiple use PAs. I'm going to jump to my punchline just to save myself time here. Is I believe that the Reserva Extrativa, the extractive reserve in Brazil, which is a protected area that limits people, was literally invented by the people who it limits. That's weird, right? Should you please limit me, right? Why? Because effectively what it was doing was saying, if you do this management of the forest in a more sustainable way, we will give you control of it. So this multiple use PA was essentially the right as an incentive, right? So we give you control of the land if you take care of it in multiple use protected areas. So I say protected areas, which sounds like zoning, but if it's a protected area that is proposed locally in order to get control of land, and then you promise conservation, it's really an incentive using land control as the payment. And land control is worth a lot more than a little bitty payment often. So that's where I'm coming from. That was the first case that I saw. And I thought, you know what? I think this is more general. I have a hypothesis. Can a conditional rights policy like that do more? Here's my hypothesis. Private actors will accept, in fact, will request permission to do conservation if their control of the land goes up. So what do I mean? So please restrict me. So literally just, I'm going to make up the category VMUPA. Instead of multiple use protected area, you're going to go with voluntary multiple use protected area. And why not? Right? Because that's what I think the HESEX is in Brazil. And I'm going to go look around for cases of VMUPAs, which is, better acronym would be great. Please, someone figure one out by the end of the talk would be lovely. Okay. So if there are threats, and this is now the story. If people are invading my land, I don't have control of my land, and we have a bunch of different stories, then I'll do different analogs. Could be my airspace. If you think about the US Clean Air Act, it's kind of like this, to be honest. It's people invading my airspace with their pollution. But let's go back to land. If people are invading my land and I don't have control of it, then I have competition, then conservation is costly, because I'm going to agree to do conservation. That's costly for me, but it's compatible because it will block the competition. So this paper is a paper about an enemy of my enemy. If I have competition or a threat to my land, I might go to the government and say, please help me exclude, and I will then do conservation. So you will limit me, but you will also limit them. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's the nature of the deals I'm looking for. And is that rights compatible? For sure it is, right? Because you're increasing exclusion rights for the people who you're putting in the protected area because you're keeping their enemies out. Is it incentive compatible? It is if the value of the rights is greater than the cost of producing the conservation. And I, as I have hinted at, believe that offering control of your land can be worth more to you than receiving a small eco-payment. By the way, eco-payments programs mostly end after a few years. Control of the land could, but doesn't have to. So there's a win-win. By the way, if it's a win-win, then really anybody could want to start it. And we see that, right? So we actually see NGOs and scientists going into Amazon estate and saying, guys, there's a win-win here to be had. So it was a third-party organization trick. But in the 24 test cases I'll refer to, some are the state said top-down, hey, this is a good deal. Some where the local came bottom-up, hey, let's make a deal, okay? So 12, 15. I will not read these boring cases, but you will then at least believe me that there are cases. And they are not cases that I found, so there's like 30 authors on this paper because I've been going around asking people, have you ever seen this? And people would contribute cases, and they're authors, you know, such as David. Okay, so I have 3 slides. I'll just tell you, in each of them, there's a terrestrial PA, a terrestrial indigenous lands, a terrestrial PES, and a marine. So you're going to see this across different venues. Just so, for instance, here are Madagascar, long-standing community claims, but mining expansion is invading, right? So it's not what we like, right? We wish that the de jure original customary claims were being, you know, enforced. Or maybe I don't even know enough about the case to say that sentence, but they are not being enforced, right? So there is invasion. People agree to resource use agreements. They accept being limited, but the limits keep the mining out, right? That's it. It's that simple. So in Calle Norte in Pará, there's illegal logging and land grabbing now, and we create 5 large, quite large PAs, and we even think about some are for living and some are for sustainable use. So you can do any number of trades that you're going to conserve if we keep people out. The China Sloping Lands Program is actually quite famous for being a PES that has impact. It's interesting, it's not totally clear that the Sloping Lands Program is actually voluntary. So it's very well targeted to sloping lands, and it's kind of like, yeah, you're going to do this whole convert cropland to forests, but it has had impact. But Andres Contoleon and colleagues go closer. They start interviewing people, and it turns out that in some cases, it's the bundle of control of the land that was actually much more influential than the payment. And we can go to their papers to see the details. Of course, I am not the expert in any of these cases. It's the co-author in question. Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, bird's head. Fisheries are super important. Clan affiliations have local and outsider rights, but those start to be eroded over time. And they said, you know what, we agree, let's do 12 MPAs in which we get more de facto rights. We keep people out, but we give up de jure rights. So you know I'm just going to keep saying the same thing over and over, right? So I won't do that, including to not put you to sleep and to save time. So there's, 4 more, 1 of each. Here's 4 more. And, I'll just say that, sometimes when I say this to marine people, they say, duh. We all know that in marine, that there's going to be these trade-offs in which people do these things. Great, I don't need to have a new idea. I just want to have an idea that we could use. So I think it's happening in marine. So these TERFs and ZRPs in Mexico, I think you ask marine economists, and there may be some in the room, they'll say, yeah, duh, TERFs are like this. We all know that there were conflicts between when private fleets started invading the areas of local fishing cooperatives. There were conflicts. A 1992 law, top-down law set, you are going to be measured on your management, but if you keep managing the marine area well, you will get to keep your rights, and we will keep others out. Okay, so over and over, we got 24 cases now. I will love it if you send us more. Please join the paper. Yeah. I'll stop soon. And you think, okay, this is sort of basic logic. It should happen more often, and it does. So one colleague says, conservation easements are like that. I said, really? Conservation easements in the US are like that? Yes. People are actually trying to limit their heirs, because who knows what your heir is going to do, take over the land and do stuff you don't want. That's a threat. You can control them by entering into this contract, not to mention taxation on the full value of the land is a threat. Sometimes people lose money when they can't pay taxes on the land. So, okay, right, reasonable. Traffic rules, right? London, Paris, people are coming in there, invading my airspace. I block my ability to drive certain cars, but I really block everyone else's ability to drive certain cars, right? So you see people signing up to limit themselves. It's not complicated. Just as an interesting, totally different story, my colleague Wu Meng from China tells me about the national key ecological function zones. in which if you agree to have certain eco-services provided, your fiscal transfers are no longer subject to the same political competition, which is usually based on economic growth, right? So you sort of get out of the economic growth fight game, right, which is hard and you don't always win it, and you make a trade, yes, I'll do the green thing, take me out of the competition. Totally different institution in space, but it's a pretty similar trade, conceptually speaking. I'll say, and then citizen complaints in the US are like this. I do work to say there should be more strict limitation of local pollution. Of course I'm limiting myself, but trivially I'm limiting the people who dump on me more, sort of the pollution analog. And I'll just say, this can go the other way. There's many, many cases where powerful firms ask for regulation that limits them, but they're doing it to beat the crap out of their competition who can't even comply. Right? So the whole restrict me to restrict others doesn't even obviously have a single distributional direction. It could be the big player who has like capacity, lawyers, et cetera. I think this was true in the moratoria in Brazil and beef and soy to the US. So you propose rules to restrict others. It's sort of well known. Let's just say that's the same dynamic, right? Restrict me to restrict others. Okay. I'll just say we're not trying to set up, let's go find places and break people's rights so let's do conservation. This is not what we're advocating for, right? But it could be that we could scale this up on public lands where the rights are not that clear. I'm working with CERFOR, the agency in Peru, on their CUSAF policy, which is kind of like this. Let's not be too, I shouldn't be too optimistic. If a government was choosing not to enforce the prior rights, it's not immediate that they're going to flip around and change it. In some sense, I hope that if they believe, as in the Colombian case, where the Yagohe Apaporis Indigenous Reserve said, put me in a protected area, the government seemed to value having the protected area. So then 2 benefits, indigenous environment was worth it, 1 benefit, just indigenous wasn't. Okay, that could reverse the story over time. And just to say, I don't want to be naive. The third party is not necessarily going to sit there. Someone's losing, the person being blocked. So, for instance, in that case in Colombia, once the indigenous group went to the Supreme Court and the government said, put me in a protected area, the mining group funded people to contest that and said, you're not representing the indigenous right, right? So someone's going to fight back when they lose, of course. Yeah. So the last thing I'll say is, since I'm an impacts kind of person, I shouldn't say that this paper shuffling an agreement always really has impact. We should show it. Different paper. And finally, what was I doing? I was saying private actors request and volunteer to do conservation if they gain exclusion rights. We have some cases. We'd love more. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you very much. So floor is open. There can be many questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. And this was really interesting, and I just wondered if you could say a little bit, thinking about like the broader social ecological systems body of literature, where we might think of, let's say nationwide decentralization policy for forests. And we know that there's going to be variation in how well that's going to work, and local community context is probably going to shape that to a very large extent. So how are you thinking about this differently from, let's just say like a broad national decentralization policy where, these are the cases where you've got more motivated local communities who, are in a situation where they're facing external threats and, by virtue of being in that particular context, they're going to be more effective. And I guess I'm just thinking around, scale. So for conservation to work, we need it to be scaled and scalable. So just interested to hear your thoughts on, kind of how this fits with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll come back here. I appreciate that, yeah. So I don't know, just to say one thing, the scale that is achievable with this exact model. That's essentially what I'm going in search of. So I'm eager to hear people say, oh, that happens a lot here, or it doesn't. I'm pretty glad to take on any case that we think has this win-win benefit, but the scale question is critical. It depends in your decentralization, where that land is coming from, but if we think about the story that there's a lot of land that is public, not quite demarcated, right? And sometimes that's the places with the highest deforestation, for instance. You could easily think of what you just said being this sort of green story here, whether, I don't know if we're starting with public land anyway, as we hand it out, we're thinking about offering people rights they didn't have. So that could be a scaling. If we did that conditionally, it would be a lot like this. That's in fact what the CER4-CUSAF policy is supposed to be like. They are looking at the Peruvian Amazon. There are folks who, they pretty much know they're not going to kick them out, so it's not going to be a sort of a banning story. So what kind of measurement and trade are they willing to make? We actually have a survey in the field now to try to ask people what trade they would make, but it's of this characteristic. It's not formal decentralization there because they won't give them tenure, but it is allegedly a trade for use rights that are long. So I'm going to guess that the larger scaling possibility comes from creating rights where they haven't been, and thinking about whether you want to condition them, which is what the CUSAF policy is like. I don't know if I've addressed your question, but that's a possibility, it seems to me.
So anybody else? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for this really expansive overview of conservation interventions and this framework. I'm thinking about, so I think so far you framed this as focusing on formal rights, restrictions of formal rights. I wonder if you would consider expanding the theoretic framework to more informal, like conservation focuses. So I'm thinking a lot of cases where indigenous communities are working with conservation groups to obtain land rights. And as part of that engagement, they may focus more on conservation than they would otherwise like to. So most recently, like in Peru, the comunidades nativas, a lot of them were supported by big conservation NGOs. And as a result, they are doing a lot of conservation. So I think like conceptually that's related, but maybe it's hard to kind of formalize the measurement of,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, if we take the analog of, say, lots of Ostrom stories, right, where there's this multi-level governance. What does multi-level governance do? Sometimes it's very formal. The California Supreme Court backs up one county in California. But other times it's the Turkish coffee house in the chapter 4 of 1990 book in which people are sort of knifing people who violate community norms, and the police are just outside being like, oh, I didn't see anything, right? So there is no formal right, but there is a known norm. It is being carried out through punishment, and the upper level power is actually just letting the norm play out. I'm not advocating knifing here at the moment, but as a general matter, the issue of if there is a functioning informal norm, like if norm just means some sort of binding constraint, and if other powers can in a way support it in a form of trade, absolutely, I think that would fit into this space, and I'm sure it is actually happening and could happen, yeah.
Hello. Carolina from Colombia. The first idea that comes to my mind is the context of conflict in Colombia. So I don't know if you think that you must put some thoughts about the risk for the communities, because in Colombia we have a high level of environmental homicides. That is first. And the second one is we have also a discussion now in Colombia between rights of use or rights, total property rights, because the farmers want to go into forest reserve zones, but with all the property rights, not only with rights of use, because the possibility of inheritance the land. And the last one is the role of the collective governance around these things that I think that could be improved, this perspective.
Sure. Just with time short, I'll say on the collective agreeing, and I think it dovetails well with the last question. On the risk one, 100%. So I would not want to say, you know what, you definitely want to walk down a broad street on the way to the agency with a piece of paper saying, I'm about to take my rights from you, because someone might want to intercept you and do violence, right? So for sure, I think the people who lose out will react. The Columbia story I told was some lawyers in the Supreme Court. I don't think there was a lot of violence there, but absolutely, I think that as you think about having someone lose and that being a powerful actor and they may respond, I agree with that. I'll just say quickly, because there's a hand over here as well, I don't know if we have time. On the use rights versus other, I think there's many different possible trades. This is not probably enough time to go into all of those, but I think just the right measurement, the right contract, and the right agreement, and the right baseline in which they don't have it allows for, in principle, the scaling that was raised here. I'll stop there. Do we have time for who's been setting everything up? Do you have a question? Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much. That was incredibly interesting. I'm Brazilian, so I just thought the part about Brazil was really interesting about the fact that they have the land that, they'll allow people to use sustainably and then give them ownership. I don't know if you looked at the after effects, but did you find that after they were given ownership of that land, they were still treating it in the same way sustainably, or were they, taking more advantage of it in that sense?
So, you're right. We need to check. I have some cases in which we see sustainable use, say extractive reserves, lasting for a long time and working. But as a general matter, my general principle from the first slides is don't believe something works just because someone said it happened. So, for instance, I have a PhD student who says, overlaps of indigenous and PAs in Colombia are more effective than either one. But this is actually a timing story, one then the other. So David has a PhD student who's thinking about working actually in Brazil, in case you guys talk, thinking about different overlaps of polygons. So we don't have that much evidence on it. I'm finding it happening, but yes, we need to keep looking at the effects over time. Speaking of over time, I am now over time. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. We Japanese are very punctual. And fortunately, in this room, everybody is very punctual. I'm very happy about it. So next speaker is Sarah Wabi from Egypt. She's a PhD candidate in public policy at the University of Minnesota. Nowadays, when we look at the journal, there are so many China papers. And obviously, value of marginal product is declining. On the other hand, Egypt, we seldom see the papers. So that means her marginal product, I'm sure, is very, very.
I hope I won't disappoint. Thank you so much. So I'll be presenting my work on the liberalization of the land rental market in Egypt and the welfare outcomes of the agricultural households. I'd really appreciate all minor, major comments, questions, everything. So I obviously don't really need to motivate this work in this conference. I'll go quickly. So as we know, most of the poor live in rural areas and engage in agriculture, and access to land helps them. It leads to higher welfare and higher resilience. And so this is why governments really care about land policies. And in a lot of cases, we've seen across different sessions in this conference, governments adopt restrictive land policies such as ceilings on land holding size or on rental price or ban on land sales. And so they want to allow access for largest segments of the population, and such policies have been popular for their distributional effects. But the fear is they could also lead to misallocation since they limit the transfer from less to more productive producers. So the expectation, if we're lifting a restrictive policy, we may be increasing efficiency, but at the same time, this could come at the expense of higher inequality or higher poverty. So this is exactly the question that I'm dealing with in this paper. I'm asking, how does the lifting of a restrictive policy, specifically rent control, and the transition to a free land rental market affect agricultural households' welfare? I look at the household total expenditure, poverty levels, and inequality at the district level. And I try to understand through which channels these effects materialize. Land allocation leading to higher land productivity, or higher occupational choice, so people being more flexible and working in agriculture or outside agriculture. And to address this question, I use a difference in difference design, comparing districts with higher exposure to the land liberalization law to districts with lower exposure to the land liberalization law, as measured by the share of land rented before and after the passage of the law in 1992. I'll explain this in detail. But okay, so to give a little bit an idea about the context, we're in Egypt in 1992, and Law 56 of 1992 just passed to end 4 decades of rent control on agricultural land. Before 1992, rents were fixed at 10 times the basic tax assessed on the plot, and the last revision was in 1975, so rents were well below the market value. In addition to the rent controls, there was very secure tenancy rights and rights of inheritance, in the sense that land tenants could bequest the land rights to their children and children of their children. So it was very difficult to evict tenants. As of 1992, there was a phased-in implementation of the law. In 1992 to 1997, there was 5-year transition period where the rents were fixed at 22 times the land tax, so a little bit more than doubling the previous rent levels. And starting 1997, it was a free market just based on agreement between landlord and tenant. So this paper contributes to a lot of the literature that has looked at the effects of undoing distortionally land policies. A lot of the literature has used calibrated models showing significant gains in productivity from the transition to land markets from customary and entitled land systems, and a loss of productivity and equity from restrictions on rental markets. It also contributes to the literature on quasi-experimental evidence showing that specific policies strengthening land rights, such as land titling and registration, lead to higher market activity and reallocation. It also contributes to the literature on land tenancy reform by offering the lens of undoing the land tenancy reform. The previous literature has showed that, specifically from West Bengal, the reform there strengthened tenants' rights and increased productivity without affecting inequality, but also reduced poverty. And lastly, it also expands on the literature on rent control to agricultural land markets in the developing world, since most of the rent control literature has focused on housing markets in the United States, and found it to mainly, even though it reduced displacement, but negatively affects supply, ultimately driving prices up. Very quick preview of the results. I find that the law increased agricultural households' expenditure in higher exposure districts, and it enhanced the conditions of the poorest decile, and the consolidation of very small land plots to small plots, in addition to a growing share of land owned by firms, suggests a shift toward commercial agriculture among small landholders. And there was no evidence of increased inequality or a higher concentration of land among large landowner owners. How I approach all this, I use a repeated cross-section, difference and difference. I don't have a panel, so as I said, I compared districts with higher exposure to the law to districts with lower exposure to the law. Exposure to the law is measured by the share of land rented in the district. Exposure to the law, this is data coming from the Egypt agricultural census in 1990, so the last census before the passage of the law. And this is to give you a little bit of a visualization of my treatment variable, which is the share of land rented. So on the left side, This is the distribution of the share of land rented, and we see that it's actually a little bit skewed towards a lower share of land rented. So the first quartile ranges from 26% to 43%. And also, again, if we break down the share of land rented by quartiles and look at the geographical distribution, we see that like different districts, districts belonging to different quartiles are represented across different parts of the country. For my outcomes, I'm getting data from the Household Income Expenditure Consumption Survey, which is a household survey at the national level, and productivity is coming again from the agricultural censuses, coupled with yearly agricultural bulletins for these years. Okay, so this is to show a little bit of the district's characteristics, again, broken down by the different quartiles. The main thing I'll talk about is that these are not balanced. As we see, the districts in quartile 4 are actually poorer than the rest of the districts. The total expenditure is lower, poverty headcount is higher, and they're also they're less represented in the Nile Delta, so they're more likely to be in the south. And so in terms of identification, I just talked about how my districts are not balanced. And so this is why, and we need the balance to argue for parallel pre-treatment trends. So to deal with this, I'm going to assume conditional parallel trends, and I'll show you shortly what I use for this. And the other thing that I'm dealing with is that my treatment variable is a continuous variable, which has been shown in the recent literature to be confounded not just by the selection into the treatment or control, but the selection into the specific treatment dose. And so I need to assume strong parallel trends so that the parallel trends hold across all the different dosages, not just across treatment and control. And the conditional parallel trends kind of help with this, with dealing with this as well. So in terms of estimation, so first I'm using traditional two-way fixed effects, where I'm looking at the effect of a binary variable, the treatment, that takes 1 if the district is in a fourth quartile of the share of land rented, and 0 if the district is in one of different definitions of comparison group. So the comparison group could be the first quartile, the second quartile, the third quartile, or the 3 bottom quartiles. The reason why I'm alternating the definition of the comparison group is, again, to take into account, it's an indirect way to test for the strong parallel trends assumption, since if things are consistent more or less across the different definitions of comparisons, this assumption has a better chance to hold. And so what I'm looking at is I'm interacting my treatment with post-1992, and then taking district fixed effect and survey year fixed effect. The other estimation method that I'm using is the doubly robust difference in difference estimator, because it imposes the balance across groups, and it combines inverse probability weighting, which reweights untreated units to mimic the distribution in the treated group, and regression adjustment, which uses the untreated units to predict the counterfactual outcome trend. And I'm specifically controlling on household size at baseline, average household expenditure at baseline, poverty headcount, and geographic location, the Delta versus the Nile Valley. So what do I find? So first I'm going to explain the structure of my tables, because they're a little bit a lot to take in. So on the columns, I'll be showing the two-way fixed effect coefficients and the W-robust difference in difference for each outcome. On the rows, I'm showing the comparison between the different comparison groups. So first is quartile 4 compared to quartile 1, and then last is quartile 4 compared to the bottom quartiles. And and mostly I'll focus on the last row since this is the bigger sample and it represents all districts. So what I found is there is a significant increase in total expenditure. This is annual expenditure by prices of 2008. This is, in the two-way fixed effect, this is a 33% increase in total expenditure. This is about a 12% increase in total expenditure, so at least 12% increase. The sign on poverty is negative, but the results are not significant, so we can't really conclude something there. And we don't really see something happening with the Gini index. I tried to look further by looking at the share of households in different expenditure percentiles as defined at baseline. Looking at before the law distribution of expenditure and how households are represented compared to these different percentiles. And so I find that there is a significant increase in households above the 99th percentile as defined at baseline, but there is also a significant decrease in households below the 10th percentile by 7%. When I look at the effects on productivity and occupation and agriculture, I don't really find much. I'll caveat this by saying that my productivity data is bad. It's combining governorate level data with district level data. In Egypt, there are 27 governorates. So the variation there is not huge. And but when I try to look further at the mechanisms, so I look at ownership, land ownership concentration. I'll remind you that so far we're looking at land holdings, so whether ownership or tenancy. But in this case, I only have access to like the plot sizes by ownership. So, but since the land will be free now to be transacted on the sales market, so that actually could be an effect. So what I'm finding is that there is a decrease in the very small plots, less than 1 fiddan. The sign is negative. It's not really significant, but suggestive decrease of the small plots. 1 fiddan is the unit of measurement in Egypt, and it's about 1 acre. This, at the same time, there is a significant increase in land small plots, like they are just beyond subsistence. And then when I look at larger land plots, 5 to 20 fiddans or even more, I'm not seeing much happening there. Also, looking at the share of area held by individuals, I'll also say that this data is coming from the agricultural census, so this is district level data. When I look at the share that is held by individuals versus the share held by firms, I find that there is a significant decrease in the share held by individuals, a significant increase in the share held by firms. And thinking about these two results together, some consolidation of plots from very small to small plots, in addition to the share of area held by firms, this is suggestive of commercialization among small landholders. Finally, I also look at the labor to machinery ratio, and I'm finding that there is a actually an increase of labor compared to machinery, although the results are not very robust, but it's also kind of supportive of the same story of like not big increase in large plots with large mechanization. I run a few robustness checks where I look at different definitions of the sample, so looking at all households instead of only agricultural households, looking at all districts, not just the agricultural districts. Different definitions of treatment, because in my main definition, I'm looking at the share of land rented, whether it's part of a pure rented plot or a mixed rented, so rented as part of a bigger plot that has also ownership. And post-treatment, after the law was completely took effect, and in general, the results are a little bit attenuated, but they hold. To conclude, I find that the liberalization of the land rental market resulted in an average increase in households' annual total expenditure by at least 12% in higher exposure districts. This increase has benefited the poorest households, given a significant decrease in the poorest decile of the population, a consolidation of the very small land plots to small plots, beyond subsistence, coupled with an increase in the share of land held by firms and a decrease in that held by private individuals, suggest a shift towards commercial agriculture among small landholders. There is no evidence of increased inequality of expenditure at the district level or higher concentration of land among large landowners. And in terms of policy, I believe that I can conclude that enduring market distortions will likely hurt the poor more than lifting them. At the same time, it's important to couple transition to free market policies with strong social protection policies to compensate the losers, since there will always be someone losing. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let me have questions. Yes.
Excellent paper, excellent presentation. So I had a couple of questions. So the first was, so you use the change in exposure, but it sounds like, couldn't that be endogenous? Like, to some extent, it seems that you have time variation. So you said that this was implemented over 5 years. So could you possibly use the timing of the rollout of the program across districts within Egypt? Yeah. So that's my first. The second was, so it was a little surprising to me that you didn't find any productivity effects. I would have thought that this type of reform would have been a win-win, like improve equity and improve efficiency. And the other one was whether you looked at alternative measures of inequality, like a Gini coefficient or a tile index or something like that. And then
sorry, what's the other one then? The Gini
tile.
Oh, tile, okay.
And then if you can clarify what happened to the ownership distribution of land versus the operational scale distribution. I wasn't clear on which of the two you were referring to. So did land become more equally distributed after that? And but then what happened to operational scales? Because if land markets are working, then they're not tied one-to-one.
Yeah. Excellent comment. So
yeah.
please
so in terms of exposure, I'm looking at the share of land rented at just before the passage of the law. So, and like this is a fixed in time variable. So I'm not, and because as I said, like there wasn't really movement in like land rents because of this very hard restrictions on evictions. So it was kind of stable before the law. I don't know if that gets to it, but I did not look at other inequality coefficients. Or like inequality measures. I should probably do that. In terms of ownership, I'm not sure. So like what I'm really, what I'm finding, like looking at the comparison, is that it doesn't look like, what I'm finding is really that like ownership did not increase that much in the larger plots. I think when you talk about operational scale, you mean like I need to check what is exactly the operational scale in this, like what would be, yeah.
So if you're using data from for many agricultural census, that has operational scales. In other words, management of the farm. Ownership is usually from a survey that you would get.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I can look at that.
Hi. Yeah, so great paper, and yeah, very nice to see this long-term evaluation. You estimate the difference in difference based on this intensity of rentals, and I think you interpret places with high rentals being the ones where the reform will bite. One could imagine the opposite. One could say, oh, in places there's no rental precisely because there is rent control. Right? People don't bring land on the market because they are concerned about rent control. That's the standard supply side argument. And of course, with that interpretation, the interpretation of the results will flip. Now, one way maybe to understand a bit more on whether your interpretation probably is right is to understand how long these rentals at baseline are. Should I think that in places with a lot of rentals, a lot of owners are stuck with long-term rentals where this rent control bite, or do you see a lot of turnover? That might be one descriptive to sort of provide further support to your interpretation of treatment intensity.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I should. The reality of things is that given that it was, as I said, like very hard to evict tenants, so it was owners were kind of stuck, exactly as you said, and. Yeah, so, but I think I'll need to show that like from older data before, yeah, and, oh, on the first, so what you meant is that, so there was a definitely fear of like renting out land. I'd say that that's another good suggestion for like making the case that why such levels of land rentals are kind of set in stone, because this is kind of like the law passed in 52 and things were kind of stuck at this point, and there were like conditions that made that some districts are more like have more rentals and other districts have lower rentals. So I don't know if like showing more data on this or discussing this maybe will make it more convincing. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. I think we had better go there. We had a long line yesterday, so we should be there as early as possible. And
thank you so much.
big hand.
Okay. Thank you.